Hey everybody, happy Tuesday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. I am Charlene O'Hanlon. Today is Tuesday, April 12th. What a great day we've got and what a great lineup we have on today's show. We kick things off today with a conversation between Alan and Marcus Merrill, who is the VP of Technology Strategy over at Sauce Labs. Sauce Labs has released the Every Experience Matters report, which talks about how user experience impacts brand loyalty, accessibility, and revenue. This is a really fascinating report, and Marcus and Alan dive into some of the results of the report and how user experience is such an important thing for organizations to consider as they are building their applications and presenting them to the general public. So it is a great conversation, and really the report, definitely want to check out the results of the report itself. It's really, really fascinating. After that, we have our DevOps Unbound episode 26. I can't believe we have 26 episodes of DevOps Unbound now. That's great. In this one, we talk about software supply chain and SBOMs for DevOps, so the software bill of materials. In this one, Alan and Mitch Ashley, our hosts, are joined by Tracy Reagan from Deploy Hub, Carolyn Wong from Cobalt, and Stephen Hendrick of the Linux Foundation. And they discuss how to mitigate software supply chain risks and how software bills of material can play an intelligent role in securing the supply chain. Really fascinating conversation, and these are some very smart people, so they've got a lot of great takeaways for you in this conversation. After that, we have the Haunted Hacker podcast. In this one, this is part 2 of a 2-part conversation that host Mike Jones has with his old friend Mick Douglas. Mick is a SANS instructor, a hacker, and a pen tester, and somebody who Mike considers to be a mentor of his. So, as with all of the Haunted Hacker conversations, they meander, but always focusing on cybersecurity, and a lot to talk about in this one. Mike says that Mick is just a very genuine guy, so they have some very genuine conversations. So definitely want to check that one out. Like I said, this is part 2. Part 1 we ran on Monday, so check out both of them. Good stuff. After that, I'm back with the news headlines, as I always am. And then I have a conversation with Richard Mellick, who is the Director of Threat Marketing and Reporting at Zimperium. And Richard and I discuss the results of Zimperium's 2022 Global Market Threat Report. This is another really fascinating study, and some of the results might surprise you. So Richard and I kind of talk about some of the results and really what it means for the mobile security landscape in general. So if you have a mobile app, and who doesn't these days, definitely want to check out this conversation and check out the Zimperium report as well. After that, I've got the webinar preview. And then we have our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Predict 2022 virtual event. This one features Prasad Akella, who is the founder and chairman of Drishti, and Sujay Narimanchi, who is the founding engineer at Drishti. And together they present how ML Ops helped AI rise. So Prasad answers 3 key questions technology leaders need to know with the emergence of new technologies such as AI and ML Ops, including what does a practical AI system look like, how does a company's AI operations need to function, what skills are needed for teams to become proficient in ML Ops. Definitely a very relevant topic, and it is a great discussion between the two of them. So want to check that one out as well. All right, that is today's lineup. It's a good one, folks. I hope you'll stick around for it. We'll be back, and we will get things rocking and rolling right after these commercial messages.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and Techstrong.tv.
All right, we are back. What a great show we've got today. We got Marcus Merrill kicking things off with Alan. Marcus is the VP of Technology Strategy over at Sauce Labs, and they discuss Sauce Labs' Every Experience Matter report. Every Experience Matters report, which talks about the user experience and how that can impact brand loyalty, accessibility, and revenue. Certainly a very, very relevant topic today, and a lot of takeaways in this conversation and in the report, so you don't want to miss either one. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I'm really happy to have a first-time guest on here for Techstrong TV. This is Marcus Merrill. Marcus is with Sauce Labs, our friends at Sauce. Hey Marcus, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So Marcus, you know what? As I mentioned, it is your first time on Techstrong TV. If you wouldn't mind, give our audience a little bit of who's Marcus Merrill, what do you do at Sauce, and your background.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm the Vice President of Technology Strategy at Sauce Labs, which is kind of a mouthful, maybe not quite obvious what that means, but I started off in the industry as a tester in 2001. So I was a tester for 18 years and a customer of Sauce Labs for 8 years before I decided to make the move to come to Sauce Labs. So in that time, I was doing API testing and Selenium testing and all kinds of testing, building all these frameworks, working for e-commerce companies and all sorts of like SaaS, B2B, B2C, every kind you can imagine. And at some point, I just decided that I wanted to come work for a vendor. And of course, you choose the best, right? So the main thing as an outsider looking in, I always thought was that I wanted Sauce to be telling me more, giving me more intelligence about what I was actually doing on the platform. And so I came here to try to do that. And with Matt Wyman and some of the folks you've interviewed in the past, we've really started to tease out a lot of stuff and expand the platform. So my actual role here is sort of appraise the entire offering that we have at Sauce Labs, figure out, what are the gaps that we have? What can we potentially offer our customers through building, buying, or partnering with other companies to see how we can offer more to our customers to do better testing.
Excellent. What a great role for a professional tester like yourself. And Marcus, that's one of the, not a fallacy, but a myth that companies like Sauce Lab have helped bust, that somehow there's not professional testers. Somehow testers are junior developers or failed developers. Either they're on their way to a developer career or they're on their way down from a developer career, right? But the fact is that, that's what a lot of people used to believe. But the fact is there's a whole cadre, there's a whole ecosystem of professional testers, people who've made their careers in testing. And obviously, I'm sure you've seen it at Sauce Labs, right? Because Sauce Labs was one of the leaders in this. The life of the professional tester has been drastically made better because of companies like Sauce and some of the other, continuous testing and automated testing kind of products out there, that when I first started DevOps.com, everyone's saying, oh my God, they're going to destroy testing. Well, there'll be no more testing jobs. Right. The testers will be obsolete. Here we are, 8-9 years later, there's more testing than ever.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Congratulations. And what a great job to kind of take a view of the market and see, okay, what can I do to make people's lives better here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Make testers' lives better.
I always feel like that's an ulterior motive almost in this role is like, how can I help make sure that the next person who comes along in the role that I used to have has access to the kinds of tools and information that we're trying now to provide to our users. A lot of the company acquisitions we've made over the past year and a half have been wish lists. Like, if we had this when I was a tester, just for a quick example, API Fortress, the product that we purchased 18 months ago, they're soon going to start offering contract testing, which you can do in parallel with, your Selenium testing, which is the kind of thing that's a dream feature that I would have had so much better success working with integrating microservices into different projects within DevOps that it's just if these products were married in the past. So I'm just now happy to be able to provide that to my fellow testers out there.
Look, I'm looking at you, I look at me. We've been in this business a while. I don't know if people a little younger don't realize how lucky they are, right? It is a golden time to be doing this. I mean, there's so much available and it works together. It's
the thing I always tell people who are in test is that it's like, if you stick around, then you've got a very nice niche. A lot of people don't stick around because they are either treated as less than, or they find that the grass is greener in the dev space, and then sometimes they find that's true, sometimes they don't. What I want is what I'm advocating for is sort of better treatment of testers all throughout the prospect, because it's a field that needs to be nurtured, and if they are going to be future developers, we need to treat them with the kind of respect you treat a junior developer. So hopefully that's something that's naturally going to evolve as we get taken more seriously, as the shift left, shift right motions that we're trying to promote start to actually take effect and produce quality all along the software development lifecycle, like we believe it will.
Absolutely. You mentioned Sauce Labs made a couple of acquisitions I call it over COVID time, the last year and a half, 2 years. You mentioned one was the API company. Any others you want to just highlight for the audience?
Yeah, real quick. We bought 3 others. One is Autonomic, which is low-code testing, primarily aimed at things like Salesforce test automation, as well as SAP, Oracle, Workday, walled garden SaaS testing, so that we can try to offer support, because we get asked all the time, should we use Selenium for Salesforce testing? It's like, well, no, you should use Sauce Labs, but you should use Autonomic for Salesforce testing, because writing Selenium against Salesforce is a frustrating exercise because of how often the product changes. You have to constantly edit your scripts. So this kind of solution is what we're offering that for. 2 others are Test Fairy, which is mobile app distribution as well as field beta testing, so that you can take, for example, like a logistics app into the field and understand what's happening in that app in terms of telemetry and cell connectivity and all sorts of things in the real world, and report bugs with all of this extra data, including screenshots and steps to reproduce, and then tie that back to the data that you get out of testing in your Sauce Labs cloud to try to make sure that's a kind of a shift right motion, so that you can make sure that you're doing testing pre-production, post-production, and then even further post-production. We have Backtrace now, which is error reporting, crash monitoring, stuff like that ties back to the developer, so that when you release something, the idea is that you can get an error report that's deduplicated and refined and symbolicated and indexed much faster than the person who finds the bug can write a Reddit post that's angry and and outraged. So those are the acquisitions that we believe are going to try to help tie testing to each step along the DevOps lifecycle.
Love it. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks for the update on that, Marcus. I guess now we can really turn to what you and I were going to talk about today. It took us a little while to get here, but Sauce has recently come out with their Every Experience Matters survey and report, or survey analysis and report. You know what, Marcus? I'm going to leave it to you. Why don't you kind of educate our audience? What is this? What was important about it? What do you want to tell us?
Well, it's really interesting, and I love the way our CEO talks about it. So you should try to talk to him at some point, Alid. But it really is this idea that when people use your software, that is now their primary interface to your brand. And when they open up your app, if they don't have a clean experience, we've always suspected this for a while, but now the survey is telling us people will abandon you. And that's why we say every experience matters, which includes every experience, including assistive technologies for people with visual and hearing impairments, accessibility concerns. We say that, what we found in the survey is that 1 in 5 users say they won't wait any length of time for an error to be fixed. They'll just go somewhere else. And having worked in an e-commerce company, I can vouch for that 100%. We had users that, Google would tell us all sorts of statistics that say the bounce rate for these users, meaning they went from Google to your site, then they went right back to Google to another site. And these errors, when we would have a lot of errors or performance issues on our site, we would see that number go up accordingly. People there's no brand loyalty in a lot of ways. And in some ways, if people are brand loyal, they still won't stick to you if they have a rough experience. So, 64% of site users say they'll reload a page 2 or 3 times. And that's it. You get 2 or 3 shots for the 500 server error to correct itself before they just go away. And a lot of what I think these statistics tell us is stuff that we can validate in our own daily lives. My bet is if I asked you to think of 2 experiences in the last 3 weeks where you've been enraged at something that happened on your phone, you'd have no trouble coming up with examples. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
just today, forget just 3 weeks.
Yeah, just today. And it's easy to say that for something like e-commerce or, even social media where I'll just come back tomorrow. But even if you're with a bank, and I noticed Matt Wyman talked about this 2 years ago in your interview, you see a billboard for a company like Wells Fargo, and now the billboard is pointing you towards their app. They don't talk about loan rates or savings rates or how great they want you to use their app. And they're saying, look how great the app experience is. In their case, they happen to be right, which is great. So we also find that 25% of people will write a negative review. I've certainly written negative reviews, and mostly based on software. Yeah.
You know what? Look, I'll be honest. I have a theory on this. When you put up your app for review, right? Or you push people, hey, I'm glad you used the app. Would you give us a review? Rate us, give us a review. We've all done that, right?
Oh, yeah.
You're asking for not the whiners. I don't want to be bad. But you're asking for people who had a less than great impression, right? Because the people who had an okay impression usually hit okay, move on. Right? They're not going to take their time to commend you. They may give you a nice star rating. Yeah. But the write-ups generally are, it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of the people just move on. Right? Yeah. It's the 20% who are going to commend you or degrade you, and unfortunately a lot of it does come from there. I'll give you a pet peeve of mine. I went to go get my booster yesterday, the second booster, and I went on Walgreens and I made an appointment. I get a call in the morning that the Walgreens I was going to didn't have any vaccine left. I need to reschedule. I go on the app. A Walgreens a mile or 2 down the road has appointments yesterday afternoon. I made my appointment. It's confirmed. I didn't get a call. I go down to the Walgreens. They don't have any vaccine either. I'm asking myself, what kind of app is this? Who's running this app? And this is Walgreens. This isn't some mom and pop store.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
And as a result, I got to tell you, I went and I scheduled my next appointment for CVS, and but I'm done. I mean, that was it. They had 2 bites at the apple, and I'm, to your point earlier, I'm done with it. I'm not going to use the Walgreens app and website anymore. It's not keyed in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny when you talk about that thing where they ask you for reviews. I've also noticed, I think if you say I'm going to give you a bad review, it says, "Oh, please send us your feedback." But if you say I'm going to give you a good review, it's going to go straight to the App Store.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, probably because someone's learned that the hard way, right? They got the cards to prove it. Yeah. Hey, while we're talking about this survey, Marcus, I'm going to attempt to put out the URL here for people. We're going to try to include it in our notes as well. But for people who want to download this whole Every Experience Matters, if you go to saucelabs.com /resources/white paper, right? That's where all your kind of white papers are. So after white paper, it's /every-experience-matters, and you can get the report right from there. I imagine if you go to saucelabs.com/resources/white paper, you could probably get to every experience matters off of that. We will try to put it in the notes. But you know what, Marcus, I always like to ask people, looking at this report and some of the results, what was counterintuitive to you? What was like, geez, I'm surprised to see that?
I think I might have been surprised to see how easy it was for survey respondents to essentially say, if your app is bad, I'm going to cost you money. It's going to cost you money. We always suspect that, and we always talk about return on investment of things like automated testing or even manual testing or putting quality efforts into your software development lifecycle. We talk about return on investment in terms of time and cost, but this is absolute. I mean, it's anecdotal proof from a lot of respondents that say this is going to cost you money. Not if my experience isn't doable, but if it's not perfect, it's going to cost you money. And so to me, it was counterintuitive how clear that finding.
I mean, look, my Walgreens experience, yes, is a perfect example. I don't believe that their data sources are tied into their app.
Yep. Scheduling. I've had some similar issues around inventory management at various retail big box stores where they say they have 965 things in stock, and then you talk to the person, they say actually
they don't have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those are the ones where you say, like, don't bother, right? Why?
Yeah, just don't do it.
I have to agree with that 100%. 100%. Marcus, we're running low on time. We're kind of over, but anything else, in time we have left that you want to highlight?
Well, I think like we've said, this has become a really big passion of mine, is around the concept of accessibility. Like 15% of the world uses the web and the internet differently from the way that the users that they are designed for, I guess you'd say. 50% of the world needs assistive technology, and most of those folks tend to have a rough time on software when it's not been designed with that in mind. And so one thing that we're trying to do is we're partnering with various companies in the ecosystem to try to make sure that we can bring this to our users. The ability to, right now, the way accessibility testing is done is typically after the development is done, someone will manually run through and see if it applies, if it does, works with WCAG or some of the standards out there. So we're trying to offer the ability to move that kind of testing earlier, to give you early warning signs.
Well, it's much like security, Marcus. Yeah. If you do it after the fact, it'll always be the caboose on the engine. Yeah. It needs to be built into the design parameters.
It does.
Right?
Right.
Like, what's our accessibility kind of view on this?
Yeah, exactly.
And then the testing validates it, but the testing shouldn't be right, we shouldn't find out what we've done with accessibility by testing. We should do accessibility and then test to make sure it works.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of the problem now, is a lot of people wait for the accessibility to testing to find out or figure out what they should have done to begin with.
Absolutely, they do. That's what happens. And so we've integrated an open source tool called Axe Core, which is being produced by a company called DQ primarily, and we've integrated that technology into our web testing, so that users can already, even today, go in and get, with 2 lines of code in an automated test, they could just get a pretty good idea of the top 10 accessibility issues on a given page, and they can start to remediate those issues. And they have found that catches something like 50% of the most common issues with accessibility. So that's big focus of ours right now.
Absolutely. Hey, before we stop, I think I messed up the URL. Let me do it again. It's saucelabs.com/resources/white-paper, or papers, excuse me, white-papers/every-experience-matters. I think I got it right that time. Marcus Merrill, thanks for being our guest on Techstrong TV, man. Come back and see us again.
Sure, will do.
All righty. Hey, we're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We'll be right back with another guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we have our DevOps Unbound series. This is episode number 26. I can't believe it. And this one is a very, very good one. This one is about software supply chain and software bills of material for DevOps. This one features Alan and Mitch Ashley as the hosts, and they are joined by Tracy Reagan from DeployHub, Carolyn Wong from Cobalt, and Stephen Hendrick from the Linux Foundation. Together, they all discuss how to mitigate software supply chain risks and how SBOMs, or software bills of material, can play an integral role in securing the software supply chain. Good stuff all the way around. It's a great conversation, as always. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of DevOps Unbound. DevOps Unbound is a bi-weekly video series where we look at relevant topics in DevOps. And they really, DevOps is sort of an umbrella term, and we look at everything under the umbrella. We have a really interesting topic today that I think is related to DevOps, and we're going to explore it. But before we do, I want to introduce you to our panel today. Before I introduce you to our panel, I wanted to just give a huge shout out to our friends at Tricentis, who sponsor and have sponsored DevOps Unbound here for a year and a half. And without them, we couldn't make this show happen. So many thanks at Tricentis. Tricentis, you should check them out for more information. We actually don't even have anyone from Tricentis on today's panel, unfortunately. So you're going to have to go to their website to find out more about them. But many thanks to them. In addition to these bi-weekly DevOps Unbound episodes, I should mention we also do a monthly, every 4 to 6 weeks, live roundtable edition of DevOps Unbound, where we ask our studio audience to be part of it. And you can check out our schedule for the next live roundtable as well. Anyway, though, let me introduce you first to our panel, and then we'll jump into today's topic. So looking at my screen, starting at the top, is our friend Tracy Reagan. Tracy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Tracy, if you wouldn't mind taking a moment and giving people a little bit of your background.
Sure. So I have been in DevOps for quite some time now. I started my career sort of as a build management specialist. I really got into putting the puzzle together of how to create a binary, which got me really into the nitty gritty of how applications are assembled. And it passed me into this world that we now call DevOps. I was doing, of course, lifecycle management at the point in time and software configuration management. And now we have grown into supply chain management. So as I say, SCM is the new SCM. And I've done this kind of work for a very, very long time, and I love it. I love the challenge. DeployHub is a kind of a new part of this puzzle that we call security and supply chain management and DevOps. We are a microservice catalog that allows you to track the ownership of a service, its usage, its inventory, its SBOM, its CVEs, and roll that up to the logical application level. So we're looking out in the future and saying, how are we going to track SBOMs in the future? And how do you even know what your application's consuming in a component-driven microservice architecture? So that's what we're up to.
Excellent. And I should mention, right, Deploy Hub may be new to the security world and to the world of SBOMs, which is in and of itself kind of a new subject. But, Tracy has been out here banging the open source drum for years now that I know her. And Deploy Hub is just a fantastic example of a really good technology with a lot of different applications of how you can use it and what you could use it for. And security and software bill of materials being one of them. So Tracy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Next.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, let me introduce you to Steve Hendrick. And Steve's VP of Research over at the Linux Foundation. But beyond that, I'm going to let Steve tell you.
Sure. Well, I'm relatively new to the Linux Foundation. Just showed up last year, middle of last year. But I was coming off 30 years as an industry analyst, and for big names like IDC, I ran all their app dev and deploy research. So research has been a sort of a cornerstone of my career as an analyst, and that's why I'm one of the two people running research over at the Linux Foundation now. And I think pertinent to today's conversation is that the first core project that I started work on at the Linux Foundation was SBOMs. Trying to find out more about SBOM adoption. And so that research went into the field around July, August of last year, and we now have a full analysis has been done, and the report has been published back in, I think, January or early February, and that's on the Linux Foundation site if you want to go grab it. Just look for something called SBOM on the Linux Foundation. I'm sure you'll find it. Anyway, so that's why I'm here.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to think here, because you're a pretty bright guy, I think you got a lot to contribute to the conversation. But Steve, welcome and thanks. Next up, look, if we're going to talk about security, this is one of my favorite people to have on a panel, and it's my friend Caroline Wong. Caroline, you can tell them your background if you don't mind.
I'm so happy to be here with this group today. I'm Caroline. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Cobalt. We are a pen test as a service company. I started my DevSecOps career nearly 20 years ago, leading information security teams at eBay and Zynga. Very cool places to be working in cybersecurity. In both cases, we were running online operations 24/7 with millions of simultaneous users daily. eBay had an uptime requirement of 99.94%, and as one of the first major e-commerce shops, enabled strangers to transact with each other over the internet. Zynga was growing incredibly rapidly as an early adopter of Amazon AWS. In 2009, the Zynga game Farmville launched, and in just a few weeks, the game went from 0 to 10 million daily active users. A few weeks later, it rose to 80 million daily active users. At Cobalt, we build security software. We provide pen testing as a service. And I also teach courses on things like the OWASP Top 10. And I'm thrilled to report, actually, that the last two versions of the OWASP Top 10, 2017 and 2021, both talk about known vulnerable components. So it's something that I think is a very real part of cybersecurity these days.
Absolutely. Caroline's being modest. She's also authored several books, the latest of which is sitting on my desk in my office, not here in the studio. She's an adjunct professor as well, and has one of the most successful LinkedIn learning classes on application security as well. But I don't mean to embarrass you too much, Caroline. Welcome and thanks for joining in. Last but not least is my co-host here on DevOps Unbound and my partner in business, Mitchell Ashley. Mitchell, go ahead.
Hey, Alan. Hello, team. Hello, panel. A great group of people. It's great to see everybody back again and have Stephen on as well. I'm Mitch Ashley. I'm CTO with Techstrong Group, working with Alan. And I also am part of our analyst research firm, Techstrong Research. I'm principal there, focusing on application security, DevOps, cloud native, and lots of good digital transformation activities. So pleasure to be joining the panel, co-hosting with you, Alan. And I know this is going to be a good one.
I think so. All right. So let's jump into it, guys and gals. The title for this episode is The Software Supply Chain and SBOMs for DevOps. And that's a great title. It's very relevant and timely and, with what's going on in the world. But to me, this all boils down to why we can't have nice things, right? When you look at, the very nature of how we've built applications from when I first got involved in technology just a few years ago to today is drastically changed, right? Today, our applications are not bespoke, right? They're not totally, I was in an ASP. I helped start an ASP in the .com days, 97, 98, 99. And back then, we had done a study, and we said that any of these out-of-box applications were good for up to 80%. You always needed to customize 20%, right? A big enterprise application. Well, application development today, about 80% of the components or the code that is in these applications are third-party code, right? They're not custom code that was written exclusively for that particular application. And in the world of microservices, man, that's blown through the window, because now we could have, for certain things, you have a microservice that's servicing 100 or 1,000 different, theoretically, applications. And what a boon to developers. We can develop stuff. We could just throw stuff together, stitch it together, and get something out the door. All's good in the world. And now, except for software supply chain issues. And those components that you're using may be out of date. Maybe they may have vulnerabilities. They may have design flaws. And how the heck am I supposed to stay up on it? Stephen, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to kick us off here today. And maybe, if you don't mind, do a better job than I have done of trying to give the history of what this whole software supply chain and SBOM stuff looks like.
Yeah, okay. Well, there's a couple things to probably keep in mind that'll help you understand the significance of what we're talking about today. I think the first thing is, and this is right from the survey we did last summer and fall, 98% of organizations in that survey were using open source software in some capacity. Okay, so and that's a number that's very similar to lots of other numbers, because most people, when they do surveys, they ask questions about that, and so I'm just confirming what's already pretty much public knowledge. So open source is out there. There's a ton of it out there. And open source has this really interesting characteristic in that many of the components, many of the larger components probably, have a whole stable of maintainers and committers. But as there's a long tail on this sort of open source componentry that people use. And in the long tail, you might have a lot of components, some that are pretty interesting to people, that really have one or two people associated with them who are maintaining them. So open source and microservices, software componentry is sort of here to stay. Those are the building blocks by which we put stuff together, just like Alan said. When it comes to the notion of an SBOM, that's a relatively recent phenomenon. So the idea of SBOMs has really been in the work for the last, 5-10 years. And it started out as a way to deal with addressing license compliance, but it pivoted a number of years ago as a consequence of security becoming more and more and more important. And so now, when we think about SBOMs, we largely think about security. How do we address security concerns, and what kind of dimensionality is that in an SBOM to help address all of that? So that's part of what we're here to talk about today, and I think it's become really important because last year, on May 18th, we had the executive order from Biden on security, and that was something we checked out in the survey. And pretty much everybody had heard about it, and pretty much everybody was saying they're going to do something as a consequence of what that represents. And SBOM was a very big part of that. So anyway, so there's a little bit of history on SBOMs. It's very relevant to how we develop applications today, and a little bit about why it's so important.
Got it. So Tracy, is SBOMs a uniquely software or open source software issue? Or you think we've got this issue anyway, whether we were using open source or not? Open source makes it better, worse?
So first of all, I want to do a shout out for the Linux Foundation. They did that. The document they published at the beginning of the year on SBOMs is really well written. There's a lot of research. If you want to learn more about it, it's a really good place to go. And Steve, what is the title of it? It's like SBOM.
I'm going to have to. I'll look while you're talking, because
okay,
I was the one who wrote it. I don't remember the title I put on it.
It's really well done, and it's pretty fascinating. It's got a lot of good information in it. On the topic of SBOMs, though, in the build space, we've been creating bomb reports for quite some time. They've recently been called SBOMs, but we still call them bomb reports if you were in the build space. And in the financial areas, they wanted bomb reports for one very precise reason. And that is so you could compare two bomb reports and get a difference report. Because when you would push code out to production environments anywhere in the highly regulated, highly audited industries like insurance and finance, you want to be able to show what the difference is between two releases. And the best way to do that is with a bill of material report. And so the output of your build should have generated a bill of material report, including any transitive dependencies that you may know of. Now, when bomb reports first started, we're talking about back in, when we were all writing make files, we didn't really have a lot of transitive dependencies. We didn't have to have scanners because we didn't consume as many open source objects as we do now. So yes, open source is one of the primary drivers, I believe, of looking into improving the security around binaries now. Because we need to understand the origin of those objects. We need to understand the vulnerabilities, and we need to be able to include them in the now SBOMs that we're creating that shows what's inside a binary. I believe that as we walk down this path of security, the concept of SBOMs will grow. We'll start adding more information in it. And we'll start tracking it a little different. The Ortelius project, which is part of the Linux Foundation, they're a great team of visionaries, I would have to say. They're thinking about ways to use blockchain to create a whole stream of basically SBOM data that's obviously immutable because we'd be using blockchain. But there's more than just what went into the object. It has a lot more implications. And I'm sure, as Carolyn will tell us when we talk about pen testing, there's other things that impact security other than just the source code. Parameters that we're setting at the cluster level or at the namespace level or at the server level, zero trust policies. How do we start implementing zero trust? Everything will depend on what is in that SBOM, and it will be the central focus of gathering that information, understanding it, and moving forward.
Caroline, sounds like a setup for you here.
So I also have a very happy dog who is really interested in SBOMs. So if you hear him barking, he's just expressing his passion for the subject.
Okay.
So I just want to acknowledge that the term SBOM sounds so scary, and if folks don't know what SBOM stands for, I think it can sound really intimidating. I think it can sound like something super important and super complex. And the way that I think about it is simply that we're cooking in the kitchen, we're making a recipe, and we should probably have a list of our ingredients, because who knows, the folks that we're serving our food to, they might have a gluten allergy. And if that's the case, we just want to know what's going into our soup. And certainly this is, also related to risk management, which is to say that, security is actually an emergent property. And if you don't know all the ingredients that are going into your soup, there's no way that you could possibly know about security as an emergent property. I've certainly seen perspectives on this topic change over the past couple of decades. 15 years ago, security people used to tell the story about how to think about security and about how to decide how much to invest in information security efforts. And the story would go like this. And just for fun, I'm going to pick on Mitch. So security practitioners used to have this story. And the story says that if Mitch and I are running away from a bear, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to run faster than Mitch because then the bear's just going to eat Mitch and I'm going to get away and it's going to be fine. And this is how we used to think about cybersecurity in almost this sort of like comparative and competitive sense. And naturally, the underlying assumption in the scenarios that I value myself, I don't care about Mitch. My success does not depend on Mitch. So as long as I get away from the bear, I don't care what happens. But of course, the problem with this analogy, and there are so many problems with this analogy, is that in reality, software companies and the digital value created by different organizations and by different individuals, it doesn't exist in silos. We are not independent islands. And so I actually think that the more appropriate analogy for how things work in modern software development and therefore in cybersecurity is that we're in a three-legged race. In a three-legged race, we have to depend upon each other. And if we're going to win this race, we have to work together in lockstep. And so that's how I really think it is today when it comes to software and when it comes to security. And so every software company, the statistics that Steve was sharing with us, every software company, including ours, is part of this tightly interwoven ecosystem of software companies and open source, components that provide a variety of products and services. And each of these uses other software companies to get their work done and so on. So it's just this tightly interconnected web. And if we're going to make software well, and if we're going to secure it well, then we have to understand what that web looks like.
Well, I feel like I have to defend my bear evasion skills now. Thank you. But clearly you would outrun me. So I think we know the answer to that. I was just going to add that, it's interesting. The analogy I like to use is like when you buy a piece of furniture from IKEA, turn open to the third page and it lists all the stuff that should be in the package of what you need to assemble this wardrobe or this desk or whatever you're building. And that's what a bill of materials is in manufacturing. Same thing for software. In our context, though, I think we're talking about software bill of materials in the context of a software supply chain, because I need to know where all those materials come from. What parts are mine? What parts are from open source? Which projects? How do they get updated? How do they get into my manufacturing, my software creation process? And to kind of talking about vulnerabilities and things like that's this complex interweb ecosystem of interdependencies between our software, third-party software, open source, services that we use, APIs that we use. All those are part of our software bill of material, our bill of materials in total. And when you think about it that way, that's where the complexity comes in and why it's so important. If you want to figure out where our problem is, first question is, well, what do we have? And that's why you need a software bill of materials.
So I'll agree with Caroline, though. I think SBOM, look, it's a great acronym, but it is a scary term. When you talk to people who aren't in security, you say, I'm worried about SBOMs. They think you're talking about about Ukraine or something, right? I mean, it's SBOMs. And then you say, no, it's software bill of materials. So maybe we can come up with something else that explains that. But, Caroline, in my world and history of security, it wasn't even outrunning the guy next to me. It was the zebra herd mentality where, I'm in a herd full of zebras and the lion's going to get someone, but not today, not my day today. It's someone else. It's another zebra's turn to get it today. And my day's coming, but not today. So there was, and that's a crappy mentality and attitude towards your security. I agree with you. Now, when I look at SBOMs, though, in terms of pen testing, think about, that would make your life easier, wouldn't it, Caroline? And, if I had an SBOM and now it's almost like, I think back to when Mitchell and I did NAC a long time ago. And back then, you could either do vulnerability scanning on a device and it'll tell you, well, what ports I found open and what settings I found through scanning. Or with NAC, we got away from that and actually just logged onto the computer and looked in the registry file at what the settings were. And sometimes we'd independently verify it, most times not. And it made it really easy because then we could check these computers in milliseconds and allow them on the network or quarantine them. Same kind of thing with SBOMs. Think about doing a pen test, against an SBOM list and say, okay, yeah, checks out good. Wait a second, this isn't on the material list.
Yep. It definitely helps, right? So the reason pen testing is effective is because the way that cyber attacks and breaches happen is that the software that we use is vulnerable and bad actors exploit those vulnerabilities. So in pen testing, you've got folks who are finding these vulnerabilities so that they can be addressed before they are exploited. And there are two common challenges in pen testing. One of them is scoping, and another one is discovery. And having an actual strong SBOM absolutely helps to save time, because then you have this precious time of a very skilled pen tester who's looking for vulnerabilities in your software. And if you can give that person a map, it saves them time, and they can spend their time looking for problems and not just trying to figure out how big is this map in the first place.
Yeah, agreed. Tracy, I'm wondering, though, you mentioned how microservices can be a real, I don't want to say a complicator, but complexity is part of our life, right? So microservices can make this a little bit more complex. Why don't we dig a little deeper on that?
Well, they're a disruption in the way we write software. Right now, when we talk about SBOMs and transitive dependencies and being able to produce that discovery, we're really talking about a single binary. And if we think about how we do SBOMs in a microservices environment, when you do your build, that's when the SBOM is created. In a monolith, you run your build, you run your scans, you create your SBOM, and it's done for the application. In a microservices world, we still have a pipeline, we still have a build, but that build is creating an image file for a function. Now, how do we know who's consuming that function? And if you want to produce a SBOM at the logical application level, how do you go about doing that? Do you keep track of it in Excel spreadsheet? How do you start managing that? And that is where the complexity, and this is the case with microservices in general, is that we don't have a really good way of tracking their usage and where they're at. And we have this data. We have, as I've kind of matured in this lifecycle management practice, I've always recognized that we've had so much data that we generate from our Jenkins pipeline, our Circle CI pipeline, and we don't do anything with it. It just sits out there in logs. So now as we do that in a microservice world, we need to do something with that data to start understanding where the origins of these objects are, where things are coming from, who's using them, how they're related, and all of the relationships that they begin to track. Once we begin thinking in a different way, we have to still have a build that shows the full application. We as consumers don't call up and say, hey, I just tried to order this really cool t-shirt and the cart service doesn't work. It won't add to the cart service. So your cart service microservice is broken. We don't say that. We just call and open a ticket. So then how do we start tracking those pieces down? It really goes back to, do we have an application level SBOM? Now we need it to understand not just that we're consuming it, but who is the owner of it and where it was created and how do we get it fixed? And what's inside of that? What's the SBOM for that microservice? What's the vulnerabilities for that microservice? And we need that information fast and in one place. We don't want to go track it down go start hunting down all of our logs through our pipeline. So we have to really, everything is shifting. We're going through a really big shift when it comes to IT. It's kind of fun. And I keep saying it, it's like a tsunami. We have microservices coming at the same time as we have this whole new discussion around security. And to be honest, I've been in software for a long time, so I feel like I'm allowed to say this. We've been sloppy when it comes to security over the years. As developers, we're just sloppy. I still see packages, Java packages being created with global star.star. You pull a star.star, I can put anything in that directory and you're going to suck it up into your package. Now you're going to deploy it out to all your environment. And no matter what we do, no matter how good we're doing things, we'll never know that object's in there because nobody ever told us it was in there and we didn't know it was in the directory. So we have to be smarter. We have to figure out ways to track what we do in a much cleaner way. And we have to think about doing that now, not just for a monolith, but we have to do it now for lots of microservices and now start tracking what a logical application looks like. So we've got some work to do in this space. We really do. And we can't be sloppy anymore.
Yeah. Guys, anybody, any comments, or else I'm going to go, Caroline?
So I couldn't agree more with Tracy. Yes, there is complexity, but it can totally be managed. There are other industries that do this properly. The airline industry, there are more than 5,000 airlines internationally. Every single day, more than 100,000 people fly on a plane. These people come from all over the place. They have all sorts of different attributes that you've got to keep track of, right? What's their origin country? What's their birthday? What's their, identification? And this works. For the most part, air travel works. For the most part, despite delays and mechanical errors and, all the different problems that happen with air travel, it works. And the reason it works is because people have agreed to standards and people enforce those standards. In software, we kind of just don't care enough. We kind of just think like what's super important is getting the feature. What's super important is making this thing work. What's super important is meeting the deadline. And we actually just don't prioritize things like making a list of the ingredients that are going into your soup. We kind of just don't prioritize things like backing up your data and making sure the backups work, because those things are not the funnest things to do, and they're not the sexiest things to do. But, we go to an airport and there are 100 not very fun and not very sexy things that each of us do. We take off our shoes and we open up our bags and we put our laptops on the thing and, we all these different things, but we do it because we've agreed that it's important. And as an industry, as a software development industry, we just kind of haven't gotten there yet. We kind of just don't think it's that important yet. And I think we'll get there. I think we're going in that direction, but we're not quite there yet.
I think one of the things that this also helps us with, Caroline, is once it's visible to you what's going into our software, and to your point, Tracy, it's kind of that laziness. It's like, oh, yeah, do we need that library? I don't know, just throw them all in because we might need them, right? When you see it put together and you're trying to manage the complexity of it or the security of it, the vulnerabilities of what you're creating, whether it's over provisioning containers or libraries that you're using, open source components, it lets you see, okay, what do we really need? What are we really building our software on? Do we need all that stuff in there? It's kind of like, do you want your iPhone to sit there and update all day because you've got 5,000 apps, or do you want the 80 or so that you might use, or whatever the number is? It lets you manage what you're creating, and it makes it visible what it is. Because if it's not visible, you don't know what to do with it. You don't know how to manage it better.
Let me add a few things here. So far in the conversation we've been having, it's been sounding almost like we're at day one of trying to deal with SBOMs, and we really aren't. We're really pretty far along. So let me just give you a view into what that looks like. First of all, if you're going to have an SBOM, you need to have some way to capture the information, and we already have several formats out there in the industry that will allow us to do that. And each one has its specific pluses, and each one has its specific minuses. And realistically, the industry has not made any decisions about which one is preferred. The reality is they all have something to offer. It's early days in sort of the standards war space. And as a consequence, all these formats have something to provide, and each one has a following. And that's that's where it's all been starting. And that's good, because you got to have some way to be able to have a machine producible and machine readable way to deal with these things, because you got to be able to deal with this in an automated way. It has to be done largely in real time, and you got to be able to do it at scale. So you need to have a format. So we've largely solved that problem. There are some sticking points there, but we've largely solved that problem to date. You also need tools, because one of the biggest concern here is how to automate the production of SBOMs. And you can't do these things manually, because if you want to go back just to your direct dependencies, that's not too hard to do. But if you want to go further down the chain, looking at your indirect dependencies for whatever your component is, it can get pretty messy and pretty complicated fast. So tooling to be able to help you understand, the sort of tree of dependencies is really important. And realistically, although I haven't even tried to put together a list of vendors in the space, and I haven't really gotten a good answer from any of the big analyst firms on whether they're tracking a market for SBOMs as of yet. The reality is there are tools out there. The Linux Foundation has some that are free to help you produce SBOMs. I'm sure that the software composition analysis vendors were very early on into the whole issue of doing license compliance and then vulnerabilities when it came to looking at components, and largely open source components. This is not a new market for SCA tools. It's been around for a while. And these guys this whole notion of SBOMs is no stranger to them, and they're looking at it very closely. And I would expect the SCA vendors to be some of the earlier ones from the standpoint of building sort of SBOM purpose, SBOM centric tooling, either to provide as a service or be able to sell to end users to be able to produce SBOMs and then eventually consume SBOMs. Because just like the production of SBOMs, if you've got a portfolio of componentry and products out there, you want to scan the whole thing. You want to understand exactly where your vulnerabilities are, help you make good, risk management decisions, and figure out how you want to do resourcing to make things better. So anyway, I think that's kind of, in a nutshell, some of the most important things I see about how SBOMs are developing. In the survey that we did, we in fact did see that about 47% of organizations are involved in SBOMs. And I will say that there's a good portion of those that kind of have dipped their toes in the water. But there's a surprising amount, about 20% of the end users that we talked to, was largely end users. There were some vendors in there, but largely end users, were really fully engaged in dealing with SBOMs. And one of the reasons for that is because in some of the industries like medical devices, healthcare, transportation, especially automotive manufacturing, if software doesn't work properly, then lives are at stake. And those particular industries have taken this whole issue of SBOMs very seriously, because they recognize the significant importance of being able to do it. This is lives matter, and this stuff, and SBOMs are going to have a very big role in helping ensure that we don't have problems with software that is in life critical situations. So anyway, I think many of the other industries are kind of looking to what's going on, the evolution of SBOMs in healthcare and in automotive, and saying, okay, we can learn from this and we can use this as a model in our industry. So anyway, that's a little bit about the fact that actually things are going fairly well in the SBOM space for having it be a quote unquote market that even I didn't even hear about when I was an industry analyst. So it's been kind of a well-kept secret, but it's getting a lot of visibility now. And I guess one last point is we did some projections on how growth would occur in the SBOM space from the standpoint of end user enterprises and vendors using SBOMs, either producing or consuming them. And 2022 is going to be most likely the year of the SBOM. We're going to see about 66% growth in 2022, and our penetration is going to go from about 45% now to up to about mid 70s And then next year, it's going to trail off because growth was so high this year. But even with 13% growth in 2023, overall penetration will go from mid-70s to mid-80s. So this is a market that pretty much everybody has their eyes on because it's such an important aspect of how we have to build and manage our software these days.
I would, Caroline's point about the cultural shift that we all have to agree that it's important to do will help this problem. Years ago, I went to a conference in Washington, D.C., and it was about software. It was about configuration management. That was just the term. And I met several vendors, software vendors to the government who tracked things like nuclear subs. And they would be able to tell you with their system, if this bolt broke, what the impact could be and who you needed to notify to have a new one sent to you. And we were talking millions and millions of parts that they had tracked that kind of data on. And what I find today is that even though, we might use SPDX or we might use Cyclone to create these SBOMs, the access to the information still is scary. The word's scary, but if you look at an SBOM, it looks pretty scary too. So I think that as we mature in managing SBOMs and everybody agrees that they need to generate them at some point in the process, we still have to think about access to them and doing something with the data, because the data in those SBOMs is pretty darn critical, especially when you are trying to sort out who's using Log4j, right? Think about how many millions of people, how many millions of applications had to be recompiled when that new version of Log4j came out. In the future, we may just have to do a new release of the Log4j microservice. But we still need to know who's using those objects. And the data is in the SBOMs, but the SBOMs, my complaint about them is that the data still is hard to access. And we generate it stays under the covers of our Jenkins pipeline, maybe in our build directory. But we have to do something with that data. And that's the next evolution, I think, in SBOM tooling, is what do you do once that data has been generated? Why is it important and how do I use it? And how do we integrate it into multiple tools so that data is like the foundational elements of how we create software?
I agree. It can't be a manual process. Like, let's assemble the build materials of what we just created, because if that software is ever changing, small parts all the time, interchangeably anywhere in the stack, whether it's infrastructure code or application frameworks, any piece of it could be changing at any moment. So it's also not just what is it now, but what has it been? Because we may be tracking down things that happened an hour, a day, a week ago also, and that SBOM has changed since then.
Yeah, and in some ways, the crux around all of this is going to be dealing with sort of how vulnerabilities evolve. And of course, what happens is on a random basis, vulnerabilities keep being found in all different kinds of components. That will never stop. That will never change. We'll always be finding new vulnerabilities. The issue is from the standpoint of being able to understand SBOMs, understand the links that SBOMs can provide to known vulnerabilities, being able to have, for instance, like the National Vulnerability Database. What's really needed is there needs to be tooling that helps you really automate the consumption of SBOM information. So the tooling, can become aware of, what it is that, the portfolio of componentry that is in your organization. And therefore, as new vulnerabilities are found, there needs to be a way to be able to, get that information pushed back to this tool in real time, so it can then tell you, that we found new vulnerabilities based on perhaps their CVSS score, which is, how severe they are from a vulnerability standpoint. make recommendations from the perspective of, okay, based on what your policy is around risk management, make some recommendations on what it is that we ought to do now if these vulnerabilities have been found. So there's, we're in the early days of having a really good way to consume this kind of information, but I don't think it's going to take that long.
Agreed. My only thought is, and we got to wrap up soon, guys, but, look, had President Biden not, or the White House not shown a light on this in their cybersecurity report, I doubt we're talking about it right now. And now, from what my understanding is, the federal government saying all software used in the Fed space needs to have SBOMs, which is a big stick, right? That's a big stick to get compliance. Is it enough? Is it a big enough stick? Will it work, for software that's not used in the federal space, foreign countries? Do we see the EU adopting a similar kind of posture? And to me, because so much in security doesn't happen because we want it to be and because we're nice people, right? Sometimes it does. It takes that stick, and I don't know. I don't know if just the White House alone here is a big enough stick for it.
Oh, we just need to make it sexy.
SBOMs are not sexy. Yeah,
they're not. We have to make them sexy. We have to make them interesting, right? I mean, I've found fascination in them from my early part of my career, and I never understood why I couldn't get in an SBOM conversation with another developer. But we need to make them sexy. We need to, as Caroline pointed out, they need to be fun, and there is some really good data in that, and it really has the ability to say, if we had that national library of open source objects, we could have notified every single individual who was using Log4j at the exact time that problem occurred. So it can be sexy. We just have to. That's our task for SBOM lovers is to make it sexy.
Hashtag SBOMs are sexy.
You got it.
We should make up little buttons like that for RSA conferences here. Hashtag SBOMs are sexy.
I think they make those for your
Someone
Crocs.
will say it's sexy, but whatever. All right, we're devolving. I need to
end this show at this point. Caroline, thank you. Thank you for coming on. Steve, thanks so much for adding so much here. It's great research as well. By the way, the report was the State of Software Bill of Materials, SBOM, and Cybersecurity Readiness Research, and you can get it over at Linux Foundation.
Read it. It's well worth it.
Tracy, always a pleasure to have you on, and great to catch up about the latest from Deploy Hub as well. Of course, Caroline's with Cobalt. That's cobalt.io. Mitchell, any last words and take us home?
SBOMs. I think it's an 8. You can dance to it. People are doing it, so join the fun.
All righty. Hey, again, thanks to Tricentis for sponsoring DevOps Unbound. We couldn't do this without them. Until next time, keep an eye on your SBOMs. And this is Alan Schimmel. We're out.
All right, we're back. Next up, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast. In this one, Mike Jones, who was the host, has a conversation with Mick Douglas. This is part 2 of a 2-part conversation. Mick is a SANS instructor. He's a pen tester and also a hacker. And Mike considers him also to be a mentor of his. So great conversations about cybersecurity and so much more. So you definitely want to check this one out. And like I said, this is part 2. So part 1 ran on Monday's show. So check that one out as well. But let's go ahead and roll this now.
So yeah, like the conference scene, I feel like it's really changed, right? So before I left for London, I had gone to DEF CON, years back, and it was a certain way. That was back when it was still at, I want to say Rio.
You would have been, or was that Riviera, actually?
Riviera. Yeah, it was with Riviera. That's where when I went with Josh and all that. But yeah, like going going from that conference to being in Europe for a couple of years and coming back, and just it seems like the scene has changed. And I don't know if it's always been this way and I just haven't been tapped into it. But like I look on Twitter and it's almost like, and I really hate Twitter with a passion. I really hate it. But it's like people try to find reasons to flame, or they try to ignite some kind of, war wagon or something. And I don't understand that. I've never really understood it, but I don't know if I was not tapped into it and I am now or what it was, but it's something new to me.
No. I'm gonna bring it back old school.
Okay.
Was Usenet civil?
Oh, good point. Yeah.
Right? Like, was IRC civil? Right?
Never.
We were there. It was every bit the shit show.
True.
It's like people are jerks. Film at 11. I do think that the thing that's a little slightly different, though, is Twitter, because it's so brief, unlike like a Usenet posting where you could be a little more nuanced. With Twitter, it's like you can just like lob a hand grenade, and you kind of almost have to weaponize it to get that engagement. Whereas with like the Usenet postings, like some people like wrote like these like massive theses.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you're right. IRC was a shit show.
Yeah, but the saving grace is unless somebody like copy pasted it, like it would just scroll off and you wouldn't hear from it again. And so like, but yeah, no. People were always jerks. I think that I do think though that there is a contingency of folks that have figured out that like by kind of curating outrage and like keeping that going, that they can kind of be somebody as a leader of a type. And, they kind of are. It's just they're leading an angry mob. And so, more power to them, I guess. But
at the same
that's
time,
not a scene.
Like social media now has, with all of the algorithms and everything, I mean, like it seems like we're all just talking to a mad vacuum, right? Like every once in a while, because we've all been talking about the certifications and we've been talking about this forever, it seems, and maybe there's been some kind of change in a little bit, but overall, like, I think the problem I have right now is like Twitter, I see the same people, LinkedIn, I see the same people. I have to go and physically go like, and then those people pop up more. Well, I mean, I want to see them, but I want to see everyone else. So, I mean, like that angry, it seems like you almost have to do that, like angry, like mob mentality. You've got to get people mad or super excited or something drastic has to happen for the algorithm to go, okay, we're going to take this a little further out, and kind of like brand it out. So how do you feel about that? Like versus IRC back in the day? Like, I mean, yeah, things did happen. Do you think it's more productive, or have we lost the productivity of what ML is trying to do with us with social media? I know there's a huge like trend of trying to fix those issues of like, how do we ethically and, responsibly make sure kids aren't going to go kill themselves because they saw too many of XYZ or somebody said
Tide Pods.
Yeah. Or eat Tide Pods, right.
Well, so I think that and I'd be lying if I said I didn't think a lot about this. Like, this is something that really kind of low-key terrifies me. I think that in some ways, the algorithms actually work for good in some use cases. So, like, like-minded people, like, find, like, a support group and, like, hey, here's, like, I'm dealing with this thing. And, like, there's, I've noticed that since I've kind of been tweeting a little bit more about, like, incident response and kind of forensic-y things, that I'm getting more of that in my feed. And that's been like actually really helpful for me. But I know firsthand from friends, one of my friends, his daughter recently graduated from college, and she like on a different platform, like started talking about like some body image type stuff. And all of a sudden she gets this like, hey, yeah, you are too fat. You need to just like have a stick of gum for dinner. And because the way the algorithms work, right, that's what you start getting, and you get more of that. And whatever you focus on, like in life, you kind of manifest more of that. And I know that sounds super hippy dippy, but I really do believe that. And on social media, it's like, boom, way elevated. And those algorithms are like hyper efficient. And so like, if you're doing like good and healthy kind of social media, you're probably going to be getting some good and healthy stuff. If you're not, though, man, you're on a trail of woe with like greased skids. And so like, I couldn't agree more, Kim. I really couldn't.
Yeah, it's also kind of scary because at the same time, you don't want to have an algorithm that only gives you what you want to hear, because that creates this. That's how we get so divided. That's partially what's happened here in the United States and across the world, is because we've been so divided because we only hear what everybody wants. Well, whatever we want to hear overall, we don't. And like sometimes people, it's good to have constructive criticism. And that's how ML hasn't figured out what constructive criticism is. If I'm gained some weight and, hey, my friend, hey, you gained a little bit of weight, like whatever, like, have you done something different? Is there something going on? That's different than saying, hey, you're fat, eat a carrot, you're sick, and then having like 200 people you don't know, like do the same thing. Absolutely. So yeah, it's pretty frightening to see like kind of how this is going to kind of play out. But it's kind of disheartening. I don't want to keep talking into a vacuum. If I wanted to talk to a vacuum.
But that's where our facts come from. Like if I have a question about the world, I go to the facts, which is social media, right? Like
right.
It's legit news in some part of the world.
And people that takes a lot, like people don't like take 5 different sources. They take their one source of, and
this time. Who's got time though? That's the thing that like I would love so I'm going to try not to violate any NDAs here, but like Mike has had career gigs where he's like spending that time and getting all that alternate like news feeds, synthesizing it, packaging it up, analyzing it, and giving a portfolio of curated news that an organization cares about. The reason that like an organization does that because they care and they have the money to do it. Right. I don't know what, like, I don't know how we could do it. Like, it sounds super undemocratic, but like, it would be hella cool if there were some way to have like an actual peer reviewed, true neutral news source. And they're just like, yo, like both sides in the middle, eat it. This is the facts.
Right.
Here you go. But like like nobody would advertise on that. Like it would have to somehow be funded. Like, I don't know how to do that.
PBS.
Peer reviewed.
You got ideas?
Well, what is your thought process on the whole Web3? So I'm kind of delving into the new Web3 like realm, kind of checking it out. It actually gives me a lot of hope. Like people are really kind of going, nobody knows what they're doing. They're just we're just going to end up in the same mess. And possibly, but here's the thing. Yes, of course, they had to you have to build something and then break it because that's what hackers do, and that's how you find problems. But at least this time around, it seems to me, at least from what I've seen, people are actually trying to go, okay, we did this, and we see that there is an issue with the security before we get way too out of hand and have these legacy systems we can't fix. How do we do this? And obviously, we're still years away from truly being at a good Web3. I went to East Denver here back in February, and it was kind of insightful that like little things that I brought up, they're like, oh, I'm like, well, it's great that it's all peer reviewed, but how do you handle insider risk? Because if everybody's getting paid not getting paid or getting paid, like somebody's got to get compensated for doing all this peer review, right? So at what point, and they're like, like, yeah, that's something really big. I'm more worried about your insider risk messing with that than anything else, because somebody's going to get upset that somebody made more or didn't make more, and they feel like unjust, right? But what are your thoughts on like the future of Web3 and where it's going and stuff?
I'll tell you what, one place that has insider risk down to a T was Bank of America. That place, insider risk, like that was an art form. They had that shit down to an art form.
I will tell you that their fraud prevention is terrible.
Well, every bank's fraud prevention is terrible.
Well, so I can't speak specifically to their fraud prevention now, but back in the day when I worked with them, their fraud prevention actually was pretty baller, because what they were doing is they said that, like, hey, here's the acceptable fraud ceiling we're going to tolerate. We're going to try to tamp it down always. But, they realized that there's a certain amount of fraud that's just going to happen. And when it went above and it became too much, they would just drop the big elbow on it and do much, because the problem is, if the things that you have to do to be anti-fraud in many cases are also anti-convenience. And at a certain point, you're pushing away consumers or organizations that are using your service, and that I can make a very, very secure bank that nobody will want to bank with, because you're going to have to give a blood sample before you log in. But getting back to the Web3, I don't know, there's really good and really bad. So some of the things that I'm really troubled with about the Web3 scene right now is there's some really, really toxic tech bro type things. And I have yet to see a legit and what I would consider a usable case for NFTs.
Oh my God, yes.
Now, I want to be clear. I am not anti-cryptocurrencies.
Right.
I think cryptocurrencies are a legitimate thing. I think blockchain is a valid thing. I think that where I start diverging from a lot of the Web3 folks is, one of the things that I always challenge people is, when you say blockchain, yay,
right,
can you swap blockchain with a access list or some sort of trusted list? And if you can just swap it with that, blockchain, you don't need blockchain. A lot of times people are it's the blockchain. And they don't know, it's like the secret voodoo sauce. I do think that some smart contract stuff can be very, very interesting. Yeah. And I don't know if you caught it, but I was when you were talking about the insider threat, because I don't know, that is absolutely absent from every single threat matrix I've ever seen in this. The only thing that I've ever seen that kind of talks about it is if what happens if somebody just kind of goes crazy, or they lose their mind or whatever. The system should, in theory, self-correct, where you say hey, the reputation of this person tanked. But I do worry about that transition, because there's going to be it won't be a gentle one. Right. And I also worry about Web3, because when somebody has that fall from grace, I don't know how the systems would allow them to recover. What if, here's a scenario. What if you have a family member or close friend die, and you're just in a dark place, and you're doing real I'm angry and acting out wrong. Right. Right. The system will shut them out, but how do you get back in? It's there's a lot of, I don't know, I'm hopeful. I'll also tell you, I am worried as all hell. So I'm trying to not be too Debbie Downer here, but one of the things that I do worry about, cryptocurrencies and all the processing that we're doing, we're really burning up energy that we don't need to be burning up.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And we've got to come up with better ways of doing what we're doing. I think that the worry that I have is we're setting up really perverse economic incentives for you to just be yeah, I'm going to shovel puppies into this furnace because they burn the best, let's go cryptocurrency choo choo. And, there needs to be some way of making it so that the system, like in a normal government, there's like accountability, and as broken as government is, at least they have to stand and face the voters a little bit. Like this system we're building, I worry that there's no accountability.
Yeah, well, I would, if I was going to dump money into something right now at this moment, I think it would be cryptocurrency. Just because the actions that we took against Russia, disconnecting them from SWIFT, they're going to start pushing cryptocurrency in Russia, guaranteed. Like they have no other way to kind of resuscitate their economy, I think. And when we do sanctions, what is the first thing that happens when we put a sanction on a country financially? They go off and grab Bitcoin. North Korea does it. China does it. But you raised a good point about the amount of energy it takes in order to make that run. And I think that if we're going to continue with cryptocurrency as a possibility of some sort of mainstream financial, system, they have to make it mineable for everybody, right? So unless you have a data center, a cold storage data center where you're like cranking through the kilowatts per hour, you can't mine shit. Like, I mean, there's just no way. I've seen people with a separate electric line go into the house in order just to mine Bitcoin. And to me, it's a financial system that we should all participate in if we're going to do it at all. But they need to make it available for everybody.
I think that I loved El Salvador's using the volcano. The volcanic energy.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was like something like, but at the same time, like that turned green energy. But like my other question for the future of Web3 is like, once quantum computing truly gets to where it's accessible to everyone, like what does that do with all of that? Like, will that completely change absolutely everything once again? I mean, will it?
It's on who gets it first.
Yeah, because if the good guys get it, like, we'll be okay. But if the bad guys get it, don't worry about Web3. Don't worry about Web3. What's going to happen is overnight, the current internet is busted.
Yeah.
And I always tell like my students, my clients, and anybody, like, hey, when quantum drops, like if the bad guys get it, I'm going to be off sailing, or I'm out in the woods somewhere. And they're like, ha, 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 ha. And I'm like,
no, for real.
I am for real right now. And then they're like, really? And I'm like, it is game the hell over.
Yep.
It is the table. Like, that is the thing that keeps me up at night when I'm thinking internet is quantum.
Quantum bugs me. True AI bugs me. And I think because we're not there, and we will never be there unless we understand true consciousness and how decisions are actually made. But we're so far away from that. I think, probably within the next 5 years, we may be a little bit closer to what AI should be. But I think right now, machine learning is probably the best that we have, advanced machine learning. But another, my pet peeve, and what doesn't keep me up at night, when it kicks me. And the idea of having that virtual existence in another world where you could buy a Gucci handbag, but it's just like, an in-game purchase. It's like $2,000, just like the regular version. And what I was doing an interview for a documentary last week, and they asked me about gaming and in-gaming purchases, rare items, and all this stuff. And I thought, kids base their value on what they have in that game. When they lose that character, it kills them. Like, it literally depresses them, and they can't function in the real world. Can you imagine how many people, adults, would be that way in metaverse if the same thing happened? Because you're going to have Kardashians on there with, Lamborghinis and all these handbags and all this stuff. And normal people are going to want that same shit. So it's just, I think it's toying with the human psychology and making value seem something that it's not, right? So the inability to decipher personal value from in-game value and relying your confidence and your existence in the physical world based on what you have in the virtual world, I think is a poison. We start out with the kids doing that, and we fed it to the kids. Now we got Meta and that clan thinking that, hey, this is great, we should do it for adults too. And I think we're going to see a shitload of problems off the metaverse.
Well, I think I agree with you but at the same time, I think that's also what, our parents thought when the internet came out. Like all of a sudden we're in this virtual reality, but we actually are seeing the downsides now of what the internet can do. Like it can cause children to, go kill themselves because or lose all of their money, or let, the parents, bank accounts get drained because they went and bought something they weren't supposed to, or get kidnapped or so many things have gone wrong with it. I mean, there's no safe way, but we've got to, part of it is, where's that social responsibility of hey, we have to teach a child that the most important thing is your own self, mentally, physically here. This is how you survive. And then once you understand that boundary, right? This is fake. And yes, there can be money made and there are all these things, and it's wonderful. At the same time, how do we teach that child? You have to go research, right? Going back to different sources. There was actually, and this has been a while, but at Burma, Facebook was automatically came with government sponsored phones. And so people in Burma thought that Facebook was the internet. They didn't know, they're just handed technology for free. And
we did that though. We did that with Obama phones, right?
Well, we've been doing it forever. I knew my scariest moment. I'm in Panama going on a boat tour, and these shacks are falling down, no wall, maybe part of a roof. But you know what? They had a Claro TV on top, a dish, state-sponsored Claro dish. That's because marketing has taken over, and they're not teaching marketing. Marketing is getting a little bit better because they've gotten backlash. Kind of same thing back with the smoking and the cigarettes back in movies, and then we went away from it. You can't share smoking in movies anymore because then kids get this false sense. Marketing is ruling these things, right? Make more money. You've got to be online. You got to be a YouTuber. You got to have all these subscribers. You got to do this. If you don't, you're not worth anything to us in the world, right? And it's okay. We want people like that. We need people like that. But we also where's that social responsibility going back to the whole parents thing? We've got to teach. This is what real life is. You may not get that job, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you. So the metaverse thing, I'm of two minds, okay? And it's really conflicting. I still am trying to resolve this. So on one hand, I kind of am good luck Meta, because if it were so compelling, I would have expected Second Life to have gone better than it did, right? But on the flip, I live in Columbus, Ohio. And recently, my wife and I have got very much into sailing. Last November, we had this amazing vacation, and it was awesome. And she's like, honey, we need to get licensed so we can go charter boats. We live in Columbus, Ohio. There's not much sailing there. So one of the things that we did, in addition to all the study guides and stuff that we did, I bought an Oculus, Oculus Quest. And there's a virtual sailing game, and it is bonkers cool how they're okay, now grab the halyard and hoist it up this way, and I'm learning all these terms, and I'm cranking grinding the winch and all this stuff, and it's I'm getting to do something that I realistically couldn't do in the real world. Right. I can't sail a 40-foot
down the Wabash.
Yeah, I just can't do that. That's not a thing. And so it's, I don't know, there's some potentials. I gotta say though, by and large, a lot of the stuff that I've been seeing is straight up stupid. Right. There's this one VR shopping app where you're literally you and your avatar are pushing a shopping cart, and then you grab the virtual object and drop it into the virtual shopping cart. Who, with a brain in their head's You know what's not good is being able to go click, click, click. Instead, I'd really like it to recreate the most annoying thing you have to do in the week.
Right.
So I was on the App Store, and it was like one of the pop-up, like top 10, downloaded something. And one of them was like Life Organizer. And like, I love organizing things. So like for me, but I mean, I would never want an app to do it. But at the same time, I'm like, is this a thing? Could I have built this? I could have built this, and it's kind of like the fart app, right? Like,
wait, hold on.
The 99-cent app would have gone haywire, but at the same time, is it teaching a kid how to shop for the first time, right? Like, is it teaching, who is it for? Who's the aim? I mean, I think I agree with you 100%.
So the key here is who is behind the app, who is actually dealing with the app. So all three of us, I think we're all in agreement that we would take the experience of metaverse and use it for a positive thing, right? But that's a very small percentage of the shitbags that live in the world. So what we see online is a direct resonance from what the world is like right now. It's just shit. Let's just face it. You got COVID, you got wars, you got corruption in government, you got people storming the White House, the Capitol, and that shit bleeds into the internet. Because those same people that are wearing, the bison horns and running through the Capitol building, they're online as well. And so that's what we're seeing. And the reason why I say that metaverse scares the shit out of me is because those idiots are going to be in metaverse. And what could be a good experience, or what could be a positive experience, is going to be ruled by the mass, by the numbers. And I hate to say it, but the numbers in the U.S. don't really reflect a lot of responsible people and outstanding citizens. So you're going to get that same chaos, that same real life, physical, just bag of shit onto the internet. And that's what we're going to see in metaverse.
For anyone who has not already seen it, that's watching this podcast, there is a movie called The Gamer. And this is one of the reasons, not just The Gamer, there's several. Even WALL-E kind of addresses lots of things that are happening right now where everybody is just stuck into a phase or a place. Things can go amazing. It can be used for good. It can be used for bad. But that's where I really believe an art is the first stage before the actual life happens, right?
Well, that's the desensitization area. So they use art to desensitize you for what's coming up next. And art imitates.
They're trying to show you hey, this could happen. But at the same time, you are right. A lot of times it just desensitizes us of the fact that hey, by the way, I'll be fat and drinking a Slurpee and a rolly chair and outer space, and it's fine, whatever.
So what are your thoughts on that, Mick, when it comes to life and bleeding into the internet? Because I think a lot of the problems we see on the internet is not only because the internet sped up that connection to where I can talk to somebody across the world in 2 seconds, but it's also what type of person is behind that and what experience they're having in life and bringing it to the internet.
So, I think that the thing that I try to keep in mind is so the internet kind of collapses humanity into exactly the situation where we can chat with one another and just exchange ideas all day, every day. I do worry that it used to be that you would have that crazy drunk uncle, you're like, oh, that's Drunkle Bill doing his crazy stuff. And you could kind of write him off. But now the internet makes it easy for all of these folks
have a platform
to you're one of my kind. And, they get this critical mass together. And, and so I think that extremism on all of its types is a serious problem. And that there needs to be some way of, for quote unquote normal people that are willing to have conversations, that you can have hey, here's how we respect people that we violently disagree with, but we can come to middle ground. But But there's also some people that were like, nah, you're out of the pool. Because like, if somebody's like, well, my opinion is I got to kill McDouglas. Hey, like, I'm not going to be able to talk you down from that. Like, you need to get away.
Right.
And like, I think that some people are too like hippy dippy on like everybody's thoughts are important. No,
they're not.
People's aren't. And then other thing is, you know, I think that some people take that side too much and they're like, well, you know, if you don't roll up your sleeves just so like you're not cool, a bad person and I got to kill you. You know, that's what Mick said. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we've got to have like some kind of like, you got to be this high to ride the ride in terms of civility. And if you don't cross that barrier, like you get to go, like we should have like this crazy net where you can just go bonkers.
Yeah.
And then there should be like a more genteel kind of like, but like, I don't know, like, how do you make that threshold and not be like crazy?
And that can vary.
Elitist
The crazy thing is worldwide, you're talking about that can vary from community to community.
Oh yeah.
Like state to state. I mean, we're talking about like, we've done this for the entire internet worldwide, right? So like, how do you find that middle ground, right? And that's kind of where this extremism, it's either, oh, well, you can have everything and be as mean as you want on this side. And then you have the other people who are like, but no, you can't even say a cuss word. Well, a cuss word could be like, you know, I don't know, something,
darn,
you know, like just something stupid. I know.
Darn.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you find that middle? It's really hard. You know?
Follow me. I'll create the middle ground. Then we'll all
that's
be in
a
trouble.
great idea.
Right? No. So we are at the end of the hour. And Mick, I got to say, man, I've been trying to hook up with you to do this podcast for months, man. And
our
it's
schedules
awesome.
are both
Crazy. Yeah. But I'll tell you what, man, it's been awesome talking to you. We need to keep in touch, man.
Hell yeah. I would love to do another one of these or just shoot the shit, just like hanging with you. But yeah, I would
Absolutely.
like have me on again. I would love it. This was a blast. I love it.
I'm glad to finally got you on here, like meet you in person. I know you're so busy, and thank you, by the way. I want to say thank you because one, I know that you work with SANS and you've got your own thing going, but the fact that you are doing internships and mentoring people, like that's what we really need. I know we all talk about certs they serve a purpose, but truly having people that mentor and give internships based off of who people are and not what they have on a piece of paper. You know, I just want to say thank you. That's really awesome. So
yeah, Mick's a great dude. He was my voice of reason when I was working at Bank of America's. Back then,
that was a hard job.
Back then, I wasn't exactly cool-headed and I wasn't that mature. So, but
well, it cuts both ways though. There were a couple times where I was like, "Yo, like this is pretty jacked up," and you would be like, "Well, you know, this." So don't. Nah, I'm not gonna let you say like that you were totally punking. Although when the thing was, when that bit got flipped on you, you'd be like, "Table flip."
True, very true. But I've grown up a little bit. Well, maybe not. Anyways,
I was like, don't brag too much.
But it was great having you on, Mick, and I definitely want to have you on again. And you know, when I'm traveling through the speaking circuit this year, I'm going to see if I can drop down in Ohio somewhere. I'll be in Pennsylvania at the end of this month again, Western Pennsylvania. So maybe we can connect somehow. But anyways, for the listeners, thanks for listening. Subscribe. There's not a banner here for YouTube, but subscribe to YouTube, and look for 2 podcasts. This one and the previous one will be released next week. And it'll be on Techstrong T. Thank you, Techstrong, for replaying the broadcast. And that's it. I'll see you guys next week. Thanks, Mick.
Bye, guys. Bye, everybody.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon and I'm here now with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article about understanding SaaS security for DevOps. Over the past few years, SaaS applications based in the cloud have exploded, with the market growing 18% each year. And it's estimated that 99% of organizations will be using one or more SaaS applications by the end of this year. What does this mean for security, especially for the security of personally identifiable information and business data in the enterprise? SaaS data includes, but is not limited to, customer-sensitive PII and payment information. Increasingly, SaaS applications also house mission-critical enterprise information, including product plans, patent information, business and operational processes, and human resources records. General-purpose application security testing solutions aren't built for SaaS software environments and often slow down DevOps processes, as well as lack the necessary visibility into SaaS environments. Instead, the patchwork of tools must be replaced with a CI/CD approach. This article outlines the impact of SaaS applications on enterprise security and offers the steps to take to ensure the security of SaaS apps. Good stuff. All right, we also look at privilege escalation vulnerability in GitHub repositories that was discovered by Legit Security. I love the name of that company, Legit Security, and has since been remediated. Researchers reported they found hundreds of GitHub instances rated with more than 1,000 stars each that could be subject to the vulnerability. The company also reached out directly to most of these affected sites, including an instance of GitHub that is used to develop the open source Nginx web server, which is employed across hundreds of millions of websites. Cybercriminals could exploit a vulnerable build script to modify code or build artifacts that would result in software being shipped with code controlled by some other entity. The vulnerability could also enable access to sensitive secrets, such as keys, that are used to access cloud services or simply create a malicious pull request. Legit security researchers discovered the vulnerability by employing a set of risk assessment tools that are part of its software as a service platform, which enables them to apply security policies across the entire software development lifecycle. Excuse me. In news, ExcelQ unveiled the cloud-based ExcelQ Live test automation platform, which is continuously integrated with a wide range of low-code and no-code application development and deployment platforms, with the goal of making it easier to run complex tests across a multi-cloud computing environment. The ExcelQ Live platform reduces testing complexity by automatically updating itself as platforms from Salesforce, ServiceNow, and other companies are updated. It also provides access to pre-built codeless automation assets that are modeled on business processes via a live link. The company is also moving toward creating a marketplace where software vendors and service providers can build and deploy pre-built testing assets as well. Gartner predicts the adoption of low-code and no-code technologies will nearly triple by 2025, and keeping up with the testing amid the influx of applications will be a major challenge. Embracing test automation platforms infused with artificial intelligence capabilities will be a critical way for organizations to keep up. All right, over on Container Journal, we list 7 CNCF tools for scheduling and orchestration. Container managers like Kubernetes have become critical to managing large numbers of containers. By running containers in a cluster, a system can optimize how each application consumes memory. Automating these container management operations has become essential as the cloud-native ecosystem moves toward microservices designs and increasingly distributed computing. Kubernetes has become the near-standard container orchestration and scheduling utility, enabling engineers to better manage their distributed nodes from one control plane. Nowadays, it is the most actively maintained orchestrator, which means much of the other tooling in this area tends to integrate with Kubernetes and extend it into unique development scenarios. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation has been a force for new cloud-native tools in areas like streaming, observability, container runtime, CI/CD, and others. This article examines 7 projects related to scheduling and orchestration that are hosted by the CNCF. Many of these open source projects are Kubernetes aware and help deal with concerns such as multi-cluster management, multi-cloud, data-intensive workloads, and other specific requirements. And we have the latest from Loft Labs, which has added an isolation capability to its open source virtual cluster software that enables multiple application workloads to more easily share the same Kubernetes cluster. This addition to vCluster reduces the time and effort required to isolate workloads running within a multi-tenant Kubernetes environment, as each virtual cluster can now be configured to have its own separate control plane to ensure isolation. Previously, any Kubernetes security mechanisms for vCluster workloads had to be created manually by cluster administrators. Now, a variety of Kubernetes security controls can be configured automatically without the need for manual configuration, including admission control policies, resource quotas and limit ranges, and network policies. The isolation mode enforces a set of baseline policies. However, administrators can further harden virtual clusters via their own custom policies. That capability will make it easier for IT teams to enforce zero-trust IT policies across a multi-tenant Kubernetes cluster. On Security Boulevard, we take a look at attorney-client privilege and email privacy. A recent case involving the former President of the United States and his attorney illustrates the possible harm that can occur when you communicate with your lawyer using anything other than a personal email address. On March 28th of this year, California Federal District Court Judge David O. Carter ruled that Donald Trump's election lawyer, John Eastman, did not waive the attorney-client and work product protections that would have applied to his communications simply by using an email account at Chapman University's Fowler School of Law, where Eastman worked, due to the specific language in the law school's privacy policy. However, Judge Carter's ruling found that the information was not privileged on other grounds. Putting aside the ultimate question of the privilege that should be afforded discussions surrounding the most recent presidential election and the January 6th storming of the U.S. Capitol building last year, the case raises an important issue for anyone who decides to email their lawyer using their employer's email account, and the importance of companies drafting data and email privacy policies that appropriately protect, or alternatively don't protect, the privilege in such communications. This article lays out what organizations need to know and includes references to other cases that illuminate the uneven landscape that is attorney-client privilege. And finally, we have information on a server-side request forgery flaw in an API used by an undisclosed U.S.-based financial services firm that serves hundreds of banks and millions of customers, which was discovered by Salt Security researchers. The flaw allowed administrative account takeover that could enable a cybercriminal to gain access to financial transactions and personal data, and allow attackers to transfer funds. Specifically, researchers could easily manipulate a number of these external interactions that required input values such as URL values. That issue has since been remediated, but the design pattern for the API that led to the flaw being created is commonly used by many other organizations. In many cases, organizations are not aware of potential API security issues. Developers should pay particular attention to user-controlled input values, adding validation and behavioral detection to protect data from SSRF attacks. All right, that's it for the headlines today. Please check back with me tomorrow when I will have a new batch. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Richard Melk, who is the Director of Threat Marketing and Reporting over at Zimperium. Richard, thank you so much for taking a couple minutes and talking with me today. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Charlene. I'm really happy to be here. It's going to be exciting times.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I do want to talk to you a little bit about the Global Mobile Threat Report that Zimperium has recently put out. But before we dive into the results, I wonder if you can introduce us to Zimperium.
Yeah, Zimperium is a mobile security company. Our tagline is "We secure mobile," and in that sense, we use that to describe how we're looking at the mobile attack surface from your endpoints to your applications, into the data that's being transferred to the applications up to the cloud. How being secured? Is it being secured? So when we say we secure mobile, we're looking at the data, the endpoints, the applications, the employees. And we've been doing this for almost, I think, 12 years now. Based out of Dallas, we've got a little over 250 employees worldwide, fully distributed market within our space. Our employees are incredible, well talented, and very, very dedicated to this idea of mobile security. We have two product suites, both on the mobile application side, Maps, and then our endpoint product, Zips. And we solely sell into the enterprise market. So you're not going to see us, bloatware installed on a phone or on a consumer device. Our market space is definitely the enterprise security space.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I do want to talk to you about this report that you guys recently came out with. Is this the first year that you've done it, or is this something that is more of a yearly endeavor for you?
This will be a yearly endeavor. Our last one was in 2019. I joined the company a year ago. And having previously worked with some large security companies that have done their own reports and looked at the past ones and said, I love where this started, but let's take this to the next level. Mm-hmm. So 2020, 2021, of course, were a little chaotic for everybody. Yeah. So we're seeing a lot of resurgences of these kind of assets out there for people. And I just said, let's see what we can do. And so I made my giant wish list and went to the team. I said, here's what I want to do. And like, this is a lot bigger than our last one. I said, I know. So that our hopes is that this sets a precedence of what's going to be coming from throughout the whole year and from year on.
So what exactly are you guys looking at in this report? I mean, mobile is a big space. So, tell me what you guys are really looking at, and then maybe we can go into some of the highlights.
So some of the things that we were looking at is like, we want to say kind of the perspective of Zimperium as a whole. We're securing your applications and your endpoint. So let's look at that whole mobile attack surface and let's see it from a data perspective, and not just data that we're finding online, but our actual own internal data. So when you become a Zimperium client, you actually sign up and say, yes, I would like to submit private data up to this. And I will clarify on this. All the data that we're pulling from the endpoints is 100% private. We don't get any information on the actual end user. We're not scanning applications or messages or looking at private information, photos, call logs, anything like that. It's basically, if an alert happens, we're notified and it goes into a mass database. And so we're looking at this 69 million sensors that are feeding into our engine and saying, what can we do with this? What's the story of 2021? Mm-hmm. Because in terms of threats across the whole space, not just mobile, it was a very interesting year. We saw a lot of rises, a lot of falls of like different threats, different exploits, attacks. It's like, well, how does this impact mobile? Mobile now is part of our attacks, part of our attack surface, and also our usage every single day. Look at this. My mobile phone, my personal mobile phone is right here in front of me. It is part of my workflow. Mm-hmm. If I'm up, taking a walk or making lunch or something that's away from my desk, I'm working on my mobile phone. But there's corporate data now on that device. have we addressed the security concerns of that? And so, like, have our customers, are they addressing it? Well, what kind of security concerns do they have by region? And does it change by region? So we said, let's get the data that we have, our own internal data, and break it apart and tell the story. And then we said, well, let's work with some of our IT leaders. And through Gartner's program Pulse, we started connecting with the IT and security leaders and saying, we just want to ask some questions. And we asked a lot of questions, a lot of survey questions. So whereas you see some other reports, like give credit where credit's due, Mobile Security Index from Verizon, really, really great report, but it's all survey data. And which is fantastic, but where's the threat data? Where's the actual meat and potatoes that tell you it's not just what someone experienced, but here's the data to back that up. So we wanted to combine the two of them into one solid report, and initially thought, okay, this will be 20 pages. 68 pages later, it's 75% of my wish list, but it's it tells a great story.
Well, so if it's 75% of your wish list, I can only imagine what 100% of your wish list, how long that report is going to be. So what did you guys go into? I mean, specifically regarding the threats and what were some of the things that really surprised you?
So we definitely looked at let's look at the standard stuff. Malware's on everybody's mind. What kind of malware's out there targeting enterprises? And so the question everyone says, well, is the threat real? Yeah, it is. And so Imperium, our ML engine detected over 2 million new variants and new samples of malware last year, not every single. So on average, I think about 5,000 a day.
That's crazy.
5,000. Yeah. And it's just like, that's an incredible. Now that's nowhere near the traditional space, but when we all think about how malware is used, I like to tell the people is, just because something is in the news doesn't mean it disappears afterwards. Now that's a proof of concept to another threat actor and say, you know what? I'm going to use that little exploit there. I'm going to use that bit of code there, and we're going to bring it back. We saw a lot of resurgences of malware. Joker came back at the beginning of this year. Barata came back. These are banker Trojans that are targeting banking applications to steal money, and they're coming back with a vengeance. We're seeing a lot of really complicated ways to deliver malware or take advantage of iOS and Android devices and the exploits they're within. But the most surprising fact actually wasn't our research. We just used the data that's provided by Google Project Zero. They've got a wonderful tracker of the zero-day exploits used in real-life attacks in the wild. And they track all the traditional endpoints, Windows, Mac OS, iPhone or iOS and Android. They're going to own up even when their own is. And they had 57 tracked zero-day exploits used in attacks last year in 2021.
Wow.
30% of those, 1 in 3, were mobile specific. So 17, which is a massive, it's a 466% increase from the previous year. Now, the one thing I really want to highlight here, before any of these listeners are going, oh yeah, it's all Android, 65% iOS. So iOS was targeted more than Android and fell victim to zero-day exploits more than Android. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And when I say jump, we went from like 2 the previous year and 3 the year prior, and then nothing for, up until I think 2017 when Pegasus was discovered.
So what changed then? I mean, why all of a sudden this explosion in iOS exploits?
I don't know. I mean, we can go off we can go off the consequential evidence of, well, iPhones are high value targets. Typically, if we look at the market, who is buying an iOS device, you're looking at senior leadership. You're looking at people who are very well connected within the data systems. There's a lot more Androids on the market, but Androids are the phones that you buy your kids, not to discount Android. I'm an Android user myself, but Android has the market value of being more game friendly, being more personal friendly, but iOS, that's the executive phone. That's the phone to have. You walk into a meeting room and the iPhone's all over the table. I think that the attack surface was just ripe. On top of that, the enterprises we've talked about, COVID, we've stepped outside our corporate offices. The security that was established for decades on decades on decades within the corporate walls. Now we're at home. And our attack surface is very different. And because the attack surface is very different, it's very vulnerable and very present out to the wild. So you've got phones, you've got tablets, you've got laptops all connecting into corporate systems through unmanaged networks. Now people are able to go and say, hey, I'm going to find that exploit. But overall, I think it just came into this thing is the mobile is now more accepted as an endpoint. It is no longer this just a phone. It is now. There are businesses that solely run on iOS and Android ecosystems because they're powerful enough now to be sole machines. You see Chrome OS rising within the enterprise market. You see a lot with the education market because it's powerful enough to do the work. So the target's there. Why wouldn't they take advantage of it?
Yeah, well, I think also, to your point, with the pandemic, everybody moved home. And so their mobile phone became their work phone. And now I know, we have, even in our organization, we don't have office phones. We only use our mobile phones as our professional devices. So there's a lot of blending between work and, home life that goes into your average day on using your mobile phone. So I can certainly see why there has been an increase. It really does kind of surprise me that especially with the traditional kind of walled garden concept of application, the approval of iOS applications, that there was such a market increase. And so do you think that threat actors are becoming much more sophisticated in the malware and the exploiting all of the vulnerabilities that they're finding? Do you think that they're just getting smarter about it?
Absolutely, 100%. We're seeing even more advanced coding processes being used in the malware creation. They're using traditional coding exercise and writing really good code, and they're investing more time into it. In 2020, there was about 5 million samples that were discovered, but a lot of them were just junk malware. And when I say junk malware, I mean, they're still malware, but rinse and repeats of previous versions. Someone took Joker and just made a little small change and made their own variant. But 2021, we saw them step back and say, okay, the novelty of COVID has worn off. The novelty of COVID apps and all these new apps, now everyone's got their apps. We didn't see a massive increase in the number of applications on endpoints, but people are now saying, okay, we're going to start targeting the apps that are there, the apps that you're using, your financial apps, your storage apps. We're going to start targeting those because, as you said, it becomes part of the ecosystem. The stats are 66% of smartphones in the enterprise are unmanaged, employee-owned, and 55% of tablets, unmanaged devices. And so this is the other areas that the threat actors are doing their market research. You can't say it because the threats that are here in the United States that are the most prolific here in North America, I should say, are different than the ones that are prolific in APAC. APAC, you're twice as likely to encounter malicious website through phishing than you are here during the global average. Now that's a very different. So each region has its own commonality. The threat actors are approaching this like a business because ultimately, I'm not going to say all of them, but most of them are looking to take advantage of things for financial gain.
Yeah.
And so they need to make money and they need to know who their target is.
Interesting. See their tax returns. It's like, what do you do for a living? Well, I hack.
I'm a YouTuber.
That's right. Social media is my bag.
Yeah,
baby.
Social media is my bag.
So what else, what other findings did you guys, what came out in this report that again, either surprised you or maybe we're kind of a little more on the ho-hum spectrum?
42% of organizations reported a mobile or web application led to a security incident within their enterprise. That's astounding, right?
That is.
See, you're even like, wow. And then phishing. Let's talk about phishing. Everyone's like, oh, phishing is the big problem. Phishing on mobile is an even bigger problem because now the phishing threat actors are, how do you say, fishers? I think that's what I really call them.
Fishers
the phishing with the 75% of the sites that we analyzed through, they came through our system, we detected as mobile specific or mobile friendly. So all that training that we've put our users through that says, here's how to detect a phishing site. You can look at the header information. You can look at this. Well, now they're saying, well, you can't see the full URL. You can't see the header information. You can't do those steps because they look even more real on mobile devices. We don't see those little nuances in the color change, right? So 75% of the phishing sites analyzed specifically targeted mobile devices. And then on the application side, it behoove me to cover this kind of side. We did analysis of multiple high risk categories. So we're looking at like financial, healthcare, shopping, and lifestyle applications. Things that are transferring personal information, credit card information, healthcare information. And we found on average 77% of Android applications and 46% of iOS apps use or potentially use at least one vulnerable encryption algorithm. And that could lead to a massive exploit of databases of information that the app is connecting into. And the story that I look at with that side is we do a lot of pen testing. We, being the proverbial market, push a lot of pen testing under traditional endpoints. You want to see, you got a brand new laptop. Let's make sure it's good. You're getting some new services. You're making sure it's good. When's the last time organizations look at the apps they're using? Because app development is a lot of open source coding, a lot of rinse and reuse. So when's the last time we've actually, we as a proverbial market have looked at the apps that our employees are using and said, is the data that they're transferring from or accessing from their mobile device secure? Is the endpoint where the data is going up to secure from a mobile attack? When's the last time we looked at that? Or have we protected our application users from malware? That's where we need to start looking at this. And that's the next step is, again, from the endpoint to the application, are we addressing the full security space?
Yeah, that's a tough one too, because, I think your statistic earlier said that more than half of the smartphones being used today are actually employee owned. Yep. And they're not owned by so there's definitely going to be some pushback, I would imagine, from the employees to say, well, this is my phone. You guys don't have any rights to look at my apps and do this. But, maybe there's got to be a larger conversation there.
There's a great conversation, and I didn't pay you to say that. So let's just make sure we say that. What you're hitting on is the idea of mobile device management.
Right.
A lot of organizations have said, well, we're for the managed devices, we're going to load out an MDM and we're going to manage your phone. But to your point, there is no way I'm going to allow an organization to load a mobile device management product on my personal device. That is an invasion of my privacy. Like, I don't want that. But if you approach it with a security mindset, as I described how Imperium works, I'm not here to make this a pitch. That's not my goal. But if you approach it from a security mindset where we're just worried about the security of the applications and the data and the device, if we're worried about the data, if we're worried about that component, you're not looking at people's private information. You're not saying you can and cannot have that application. From the application security side, if your application runs on a device that is compromised, are you ensured that your application isn't being targeted? Or beyond that, if you're a financial institution and you have an application that is targeted by one of these banking Trojans that are very, very common in this space, how is it secure against these direct targets or direct attacks? Phishing, a big one. How are you protecting against phishing? Network attacks. You're connecting to a rogue Wi-Fi. How do you know that it's not suspicious or redirecting your traffic or doing something that could compromise your personal and corporate information? So an organization needs to look at it and say, we're not here to manage your device. We're here to secure your device. You can use it, do what you want, but know that if something that's going to jeopardize both your and the corporate security happens, we're going to step in and prevent that step from happening.
Yeah. Well, I hope that more organizations do consider the security of the mobile devices, considering the majority of traffic these days does actually run on a mobile device. And so it's, it just makes sense for an organization to want to better protect its data as it runs over their employees' mobile devices. So
you're right. I guess we'll have to see. This isn't changing. We're not, some people are calling back and saying, we're going back to the office, but it's still going to be hybrid. Your data is still going to be leaving. So how are you securing it once it leaves your office?
And you can't lock it down once, the that door has been opened and it's not going to shut anytime soon.
Absolutely.
So I think the next year is going to be really interesting to see from a mobile device perspective how organizations do approach the security of their data on those devices, and whether they actually take a bigger role, if you will, or play a bigger role in ensuring that those devices are as secure as possible. Because we're still very much in the Wild West, I think, when it comes to mobile device management, and we've been talking about mobile device management for at least 15 years now.
Yeah.
So, it's certainly a topic that is growing in importance, and it's certainly addressing a problem that is nowhere near going away.
Yeah, it's definitely time to move beyond management into threat defense. I think if I'm to end on one idea, we at the proverbial we in the market have invested so much time and energy into getting to this next generation space and endpoint security. We're approaching security of desktops and laptops with advanced mindsets. The mobile phone is no different, and it needs to be approached with an advanced mindset of security just the same. It needs to be seen as an endpoint, not a phone.
Well, Richard, I do appreciate your time walking me through what Zimperium has found in the survey. If folks want to take a look at the survey, is it freely available? There's a gated page, but there's also executive briefs. If you just go to Zimperium.com, you'll see all the links there. You can access it there. And then we have a webinar coming up as well that we're going to go over some data as well. So you're welcome to sign up for that. No sales messages in there. We're just going to bring in the security researchers and we're going to start talking about the data. Awesome. Well, thanks for your time today. I do appreciate it. I'm sure I'll see you again on a future Techstrong TV interview. We'll be talking about some other really cool things in the mobile device management space. So thanks again.
Always happy to join you. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinars preview. I always tell you we have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. I got 3 here for you that I hope you can join us. They're all 3 very, very interesting ones. So mark your calendars, folks. All right, the first one is called Using DevSecOps for Continuous Compliance and Security Automation. This one is happening Tuesday, April 19th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This is sponsored by OpsMX. Compliance and security practices often depend on manual, outdated methods that impede software delivery performance. Compliance breaches that occur late in the software delivery pipeline result in costly mistakes that are difficult to correct. In this webinar, we will discuss how leading companies are automating security and compliance within their continuous delivery pipelines, resulting in faster discovery, detection, and remediation of security violations and vulnerabilities. Good one there. All right, the second one is called 2022 Container Security Trends Expert Panel Livestream. This one is happening Wednesday, April 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is sponsored by Sneak. The cloud is where applications run today, but the cloud itself is software managed and run with code such as infrastructure as code, Kubernetes, and Helm configs and Docker files. Securing your cloud can and should follow much the same model as the security of the apps you're running in it. In this webinar, Techstrong research analysts will share new research on securing cloud environments, containers, and the need for greater visibility and collaboration between engineers, operations, and security teams. In addition, a subject matter expert from Sneak will discuss challenges and successes observed from teams applying developer-first security principles to their cloud-native infrastructures. Another good one there. All right, the third and final webinar I want to let you know about today is called Building High-Performing DevOps Teams. This one is happening Wednesday, April 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This is one of our DevOps Unbound panel discussions sponsored by Tricentis. To improve software delivery performance, the first thing organizations need to do is improve their DevOps team's expertise. DevOps doesn't deliver code by itself. It takes a great team to do it. So how can we help our DevOps team become high performers with and foster innovation? What makes an effective DevOps team? What does the future hold for DevOps engineers? All these questions and more will be served up by our panel of experts as they discuss the role of DevOps, the demand for DevOps engineers, and the main principles and practices that DevOps teams should apply to achieve high performance. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview for today. I'll be back on Thursday with a brand new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session on MLOps. Sujay and I look forward to picking up where John Lewis left off on DevSecOps and talking about how MLOps are going to be central to the rise of AI. And in particular, what we're looking to give you today is a view from the trenches. I'm Prasad Akila, and I'm the founder and chairman of Drishti. And Sujay Narumanchi is our founding engineer. What we'd like to do is start with giving you a sense of Drishti, because the entire context of what we'll talk about this morning is built on this frame. Much like you and I working on a computer and writing email messages use a spell checker and a grammar checker to get it right, what Drishti does is uses video to help all of these people on the plant floor who make the computers, the cars, and the phones that you and I use on a daily basis come out right. There's a reason why when you start your car every morning it works, or you turn your phone on it works, because these people build incredible systems that are defect-free. So it's defect that we focus on, it's the productivity that we focus on, and we stream video to the cloud, we info in the cloud, and we provide them feedback in real time as they go about doing their jobs. So we've heard the adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words. We here at Drishti talk about a video being worth 1,000,000. And because we're working with this kind of problem, that a few things that distinguish what we do from everybody else in the AI world. The first is video, not a static frame. The second is the real-time nature of what we're doing here. And the third is the accuracy that we need to maintain in order to be able to identify the outliers when they make a mistake, the rare mistake. So let's go on, let's dig into this. And Sujay, welcome to the session. I'm looking forward to this conversation and to your deep insights.
Thank you, Prasad. Likewise.
When I started Drishti back in 2016, the world of software had just gone through a massive transformation. We moved from a world in which we actually coded logic, coded understanding, coded context, to actually providing data to drive this coding process. It's what's called Software 2.0. And essentially what you're seeing more and more systems do is move to this new world of Software 2.0. We've actually had to build many of these systems. And Sujay, maybe you can help us understand the fundamental difference between 1.0 and 2.0.
Sure, Prasad. So I will take an example to highlight this difference. And this is something that I started working on when I started machine learning and computer vision, some challenges that I faced. So let's say, you're given an image and you want to know what to identify the content of the image, right? Like, let's say I'm wearing a t-shirt and then I'm wearing a I'm wearing a shirt, blue colored shirt, which is checkered, right? If I have to build a system that can recognize this, at least the old way of doing things was I would come up with hand engineered features, which would say, okay, this is the shape of the shirt, this is how patterns should be, this is how colors are, and so on. But the challenge is when you actually go into the real world, there's a lot of variation. Like if I say this is a blue shirt, right? You can have maybe another image where the background is blue. So coming up with rules to actually distinguish between the shirt, the background, etc., is extremely complicated. So the way the software 2.0 world has changed is that instead of hand engineering features and rules, you throw in a lot of data at the system. This data is actually annotated data, where some human being has looked at images and labeled what's exactly in that image. And the machine or the neural network or the algorithm actually learns this role. And this has seen tremendous progress right since 2012, where you have deep neural networks. And I think this is the way forward.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember Charles Van in my lab back in 1987 trying to figure out cutting tools using a neural network running on a Sun 3150. And I see what you guys can do today, and it's night and day difference. But coming back here, I think there's two fundamental parts to software 2.0. One is the infrequent training process, and the second is the continuous inferring process. And the two of them have different dynamics, and we'll talk about them here. But this is the entire system we are operating with, quite different than what we've used to for the last 50 years of software. Now, to build this out, as we said, it's a system, and in particular, in our case, we're living in the real world on the plant floor. Walk us through the different elements of the process, both execution as well as building and capabilities.
Sure. So, the entire machine learning lifecycle, it starts with data, raw data, and it ends with actionable insights that customers can take, right? So the first step of this, or the first building block, I would say, is the data layer. You have data sources. In the case of Drishti, we have video cameras, but you could have images, you can have audio, and so on. And making sure that you have a strong data layer, being able to ingest data, stream data is extremely important. And that's the first step. But once you have this data, the next step is actually getting some of this data annotated. This is where labeling and annotation comes in. And when you have annotated data, the next step is actually to train machine learning models that can kind of mimic what the annotators have done. So this whole process of coming up with a neural network model and training the model that can annotate data itself is the next step. And once you finish training, you're left with a trained model that you can actually deploy in the real world. In case of Drishti, you have neural networks that run 24/7 on live video data. And once you deploy models, they actually generate data, which can be used for business intelligence, for business analytics, and so on.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I looked at the space back in 2016, what became clear to me is that not every company can actually afford the skill set required to build out the first 4 steps. And really all they care about is the last one, which is give me the insights I need to better run my business. And so by operationalizing much of this, trying to almost abstract it away from the user, we actually drive greater usage in the real world. And so we'll talk about the elements. We'll try and help the audience understand how to address these and some of the challenges. And it's really about the challenges, I think that's the fun part that I want to talk about here. So as an example, it's getting the data quality high is very central to what we're doing. So as I think I said earlier, our customers build parts that run. When you turn the car on in the morning, it works. You turn your phone on, it works. You turn your computer on, it works. And that's because they built to what's called 9 parts per million, digit parts per million defect rates, which is insanely good. We don't quite realize it, but if you think about cars 40 years ago, you see the difference. Now, when they're running that efficiently, we've got to run things as well. So we can't afford certain things. The first thing is data quality. And as you can see here, one day, I think we remember early in the days, we suddenly started seeing no data there. You want to tell us what happened there and how we dealt with it?
Yep. I mean, there were multiple occasions, Prasad, but basically you have gaps in data, right? And gaps in data can occur for various reasons. Your network can break or the disk can get full. and so on. So making sure that you have robust monitoring, both at the sensor layer and at the data storage layer, is extremely critical to get the foundation right. But that was just one challenge, right? There could be like plenty other challenges. For instance, we've seen that when you calibrate your cameras and your neural networks, you have cameras placed with a particular field of view at an angle, right? And we've seen that this angle changes. It could change due to many reasons. One very interesting story was at one time, apparently somebody was cleaning at the end of the shift and accidentally knocked over the camera, and the angle went totally out of view. But it could also change more organically. The entire factory floor is dynamic. There are many vibrations and so on. So making sure that you monitor even where the camera is placed, your sensor and so on, is extremely critical.
Yep. And without a proper data, you have nothing to work with. Now, speaking of data and transforming that into something useful, the way I think about what we do is like my mother training me, telling me what an apple and an orange is, and my little 3-year-old brain figuring them out, maybe younger. But what we have today, really in the world of AI, is a 3-year-old brain. So to train that brain properly, we've got to really get the data correct. And getting data correct, as it turns out, is not easy.
Yep. Like, at least labeling is a very hard task, right? I would maybe just give you one or two examples. When you have similar looking images, let's say annotated by different human beings, they may come up with different labels for those images. And if you feed in such conflicting information to a neural network, it would get totally confused and not perform accurately. So making sure that you have ways to audit data so that the quality of data actually is extremely high before you've trained the neural network is extremely important. And apart from accuracy, also labeling is a hard task because when you define something, it's easy, but in the real world, you see many, many variations of it, right? If I take a simple example, you can see a unit in the image right there. On the top image, you see that it's clearly defined as a unit present on the table. But when you actually go to label, like if you look at the bottom 3 images, sometimes it gets occluded, sometimes there can be multiple units, or it's somewhere present in the corner of the frame. What do you do in these cases? So generally, the machine learning team knows what to do. So it's important to make sure that the annotation team and the machine learning team collaborate well, and you have a standard way to handle all of these cases.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're dealing with video, there's yet another dimension that's not shown in this example here, which is the timing of this, right? At the very core of Drishti is what we call action recognition. Like there's object recognition that the static world looks at. We look at the dynamic world and track action recognition, what the person's doing. So the temporal aspect of annotation, of labeling, when does an event start, when does an event end, is super critical and very, very hard to get, especially when you've got multiple annotators trying to annotate the same data set. So I think that's a whole different challenge that we'll talk about some other time. Now, this data itself has to help us be robust to the world. I mean, when you and I think about a plant floor, we probably think about it as being static, but it really is very dynamic. We've got people coming and going out of the job, just people doing all kinds of things on the floor, process changing, tooling changing. Tell us how you address all of this so you actually have a proper working ML system.
Yep. I mean, so training is very hard, right? Primarily because there is a lot of variation. You could have objects and actions of various sizes present at different locations, different lighting conditions, backgrounds, and so on. So firstly, you need to have smart enough neural networks that can handle all of these cases. But what we've realized is a very, you can say a good strategy to help these neural networks train better is to feed it intelligent data. So by having smart sampling that can feed in all of these edge cases, it goes a long way in improving accuracy, much more than if you were to feed large amounts of similar data. So that's one thing, making sure you have
So when you say smart sampling, you're really saying that the data has to represent the variance in the real world. Exactly.
And with this comes another challenge where neural networks, we all know, require a large amount of data to train. But that can lead to costs all through, right? You have data costs, you need to annotate a lot more data. It takes a lot more time to deploy. So trying to cut down the amount of data needed to train a neural network is an important problem to solve. And it's a very promising research area as well, called semi-supervised learning and unsupervised learning. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's quite amazing how much progress we've made in Drishti itself over the last 5 years, where we've gone from annotating large data sets to increasingly smaller data sets, yet keeping the accuracy high. I think this is the other thing that happens here. You got to keep accuracy in check to make sure all of this works. And speaking of accuracy, and this data drifting all the time, and I remember this case that we ran into early in the day. We had a live system running and suddenly something changed. Beautiful results tanked overnight. And we learned that essentially the plant had gone from issuing black gloves to asking them to use gray gloves one day. And of course, to the 3-year-old brain, this is completely different. It's seeing something new it's never seen before. So I guess we've got to think about system accuracy in the face of this drift.
Yeah, absolutely. Like this was one of our first launches and it was totally shocking. But then what we've realized is this is the order of the day. Things change. And the only way to remain accurate is to track the change and stay up to date. So what we do and what's important for any ML system is to make sure that you continuously monitor your accuracies, identify mistakes, and feed back those mistakes back into your training process. So we call this process the continuous training process, so that your models can remain up to date, they can remain fresh, and they're as accurate as they can be.
And this, as we will point out later, is one of the central differences between the software 1.0 world and the software 2.0 world, this need for continuous training, which you never had to do before. And the reason you do the continuous training is to keep the accuracy levels very high. We talked about this single part per million defect rate, and really we're going to increasingly more accurate systems because that's what the use case, the customer's business problem needs. So talk about going from 99% to 99.9 to 99.99 in the face of the real world needs and the kinds of solutions that are out there.
Yep, Prasad. So it's often harder, I would say, to go from 99 to 99.9 than it is to go from 0 to 99. But some of the techniques and strategies that we've employed is, one is you can ensemble multiple models. It's called a mixture of expert systems, where you have, let's say, multiple views of the same process, have different neural networks annotating each of the views, and then you finally aggregate data and come up with a combined output that would be more accurate than any of the individual outputs. That's one way to do it. But apart from that, what we also do is have this thing called heuristics, where we take the raw output from the neural network models and apply some kind of business rules to prevent any egregious errors from happening. So because we know the state of the system, we know that certain results are completely not possible. And baking in this information helps improve the accuracy in like disproportionately, I would say. And lastly, I think this whole machine learning system is really a human machine system, because you have a model that predicts something, but then a portion of that gets vetted by human beings. And when human beings actually find mistakes, feeding those mistakes back into the model to the training process is extremely critical, so that the model doesn't make the same mistake again in the future.
So what that leaves us then with is, on the MLOps side, is the need to manage these models to determine which is the right one, and keep selecting the right one as the world around you chooses properly. Mm-hmm. The second is this model management has to go across plants. I mean, you could be having multiple lines on the same plant looking different, building the same product. And the same lines in different plants, you could have one in Mexico and one in China looking quite different than what you just saw. So this model management becomes central to the MLOps process, as is this feedback loop, because the feedback loops keeps the system on track, if I can call it that way. So very, very critical, whether you're just looking at the core data or even the business heuristics running on top of it being managed here. So I guess we've seen our customers say, hey, this is all fine and dandy. You guys can run this system, but I want to make a change on the floor. And in the spirit of continuous improvement, which is what manufacturing is all about, I want to run a Kaizen event, and I want to make a change, and I want to actually be in control of the process. The minute I make a change, I want your measurement system to tell me something is right or wrong. Now, this is the next big game to be playing in town, right? This notion of self-service AI. Yep. Walk us through what's up in front of us here.
Yeah, Prasad. So at least if you see, there are many of these no-code solutions available today for building your own websites, right? You don't have to know how to program JavaScript or HTML. At least the way I see Drishti and generally the world of ML evolving in the future is that you can provide solutions to your customer where they can train their own AI. They train their own models because they are the domain experts. And if you can bring ML close to them, and even if they don't understand under the hood what's happening, but they're able to plug and play a system together, that would help them achieve their results much faster.
Yeah, this is the evolution I've seen in robotics over the last 30, 40 years, where you needed experts like me to be on the floor to set it up. But increasingly, we're reaching the point where you different skill set on the floor. The skill set is relevant to the people, their domain expertise, what they are capable of, and the vendor like us or the system, if I think of it as an ML system, compensates and lets the two of them work well together so you actually can operate on the plant floor and really build these live systems, which has been one of the challenges that AI has had for 40 years now, is practical systems like what we built at Drishti. So I couldn't agree more with you. The self-service AI is the next big challenge. And I think the more customers get it, the more excited they get. Now, change comes with change at the human level. And as we built Drishti out, I remember sitting and building the first business plan. And what was different about the business plan than any business plan I'd built before was this army, what appeared to me to be an army of labelers at that point. I remember having a business model where I needed thousands of labelers, and I was scratching my head saying, whoa, what is this? So it's clear that there's a huge shift between software one and software two. Software two builds on software one, but there's a huge data element in all of this playing out. Walk us through the big differences.
Yep. And Prasad, as you mentioned, like software 2.0, I feel it has all the elements of software 1.0 and more, right? Firstly, like you said, there is data. You need to be able to get data annotated and stored effectively. And this entire tooling around annotation becomes very critical. But even from an ML or an engineering standpoint, things change, right? Previously, at least I used to be writing a lot of unit tests, integration tests, and so on. But suddenly now you have to make sure you write data tests because the output of your AI system is probabilistic in nature. It changes with the data. So making sure you have robust testing on, let's say, new data elements, et cetera, is extremely critical. And this change not just affects, let's say, engineering, but it also affects your QA teams. Because your QA teams, apart from doing functional testing, performance testing, they have to test the data quality. And I would say, lastly, DevOps as a process itself would involve, like, it would undergo some amount of change where previously you were responsible for deploying, monitoring the releases, and so on. But now you need to make sure you monitor the accuracies and then monitor the retraining. And then if there's a new build of the model, you have to redeploy the model. So that's an added element.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that. You talked about tooling for annotation. That's an entire team unto itself that never existed on an engineering team's org chart before, right? And this notion of actually quality is interesting. Last night I was playing with Google Photos and was picking images of my kids from when they were little and when they're now and asked me to merge it. And this notion of actually looking at that data quality from a quantitative perspective is fundamentally different than anything that a quality team has done before. They've done, okay, is this, when I click through a certain sequence, is it working? Now, like, does that number look right to me or not? Becomes one of the core issues they need to think through, and which means a quality team needs quantitative skills that didn't exist before, right? It's a sea change that we're staring at. So what Sujay and I thought we'd offer back to the community today is this notion of an MLOps house. It's inspired by what originally was called the Toyota Production System House. Think of it as a lean house. And what we're looking at here and asking ourselves is, if I'm a customer and my goal is to actually have actionable data with those insights at the right time, generate at the lowest cost and the highest reliability, how do I structure the system? And what are the critical parts? So you see here, we've got a foundation, we've got pillars, and we've got a roof. And just to give you an example, the data infrastructure that Sujay and I talked about, the ability to have robust pipelines that bring the video data in, or whatever data you're operating with, in a very consistent form, straight into the platform without any lossage along the way, is the absolute bedrock of what we're talking about. But then you got to have your ML library. You got to figure out what to do here. And so maybe I can call on you, Sujay, to help us think about the ML model library and then go from there.
Yeah. So Prasad, I don't think there would be a single model that would be able to perform every task, right? So we would pretty much have, I would say, a suite of models, and each cater to a particular task. So being able to manage these multiple models, version them, and bring in, let's say, the latest state-of-the-art research into your system is something that's extremely important. So that's why we're calling this the ML model library, and this would just always keep increasing.
Correct. And then you got the two pillars, right? You got the ML and the ops sitting there, right? So there's the ML, if you will, is how do I keep my ML tuned?
Yep.
And then as the world changes, how do I deal with those changes? So walk us through what that looks like.
Yep. So the two pillars. So ML is essentially, you want to be able to model the real world. How do you go from raw data to actual data that models your real world, right? So this includes you annotate some, you train, you apply your heuristics and your business rules. And then in this whole process, you may have multiple heuristics, multiple models. So you have to finally tune and come up with the one set of models and heuristics that are of highest accuracy. With that, you can actually generate data from your real world. But then how do you make sure that that data stays up to date? We talked about the drift problem earlier, right? Things change. The entire world is dynamic. So making sure your models stay fresh is the entire ops component, where once you deploy, you actually monitor. You monitor the accuracies, and then to monitor, you need human beings because they sample and they wet some amount of data. And the sample data actually goes back into your model as a continuous retraining process so that you can actually stay fresh.
So essentially, there's two loops being closed on ourselves here, right? One is a design time loop. As you tune, you figure out, am I getting the most accurate model in place? And the second is, as the world changes, there's a problem-solving aspect to this, right? We talked about the non-intuitive nature of AI. And so the question is, how do I scientifically problem solve, get most efficient at it, so that as the world changes, I can keep on top of all of this with minimal effort and quicker speed? Because the bigger the lag between the change in the world and my tracking system, the poorer the quality of data I'm giving my customer. And so we believe that this kind of approach, the structure that will let all of ML make the kind of headway that we need to make to continue with the rise of AI, is central. And love to discuss this in the QA part if anybody is curious about it. So I think, Sujay and I want to close out with what we call the implementer's roadmap. So you're out there, you're trying to design your system, and our guidance to you is first, design your entire system with your use case in mind. You saw that accuracy and the real-time nature of what we do drove all of our design systems. So think about what's most important to your customers, work your way back from there, and design for that. The second piece of guidance that we have is ensure that domain expertise permeates your teams. I think Sujay spoke about this, the notion that the annotation team and the neural network teams need to be proximal, need to be in constant communication, because if you don't get the annotated data right, the poor neural network guys are dying. So it's super critical to close that gap. And then details matter. You know, we're dealing in a non-intuitive world, and debugging is hard. So as Sujay says, attention is all you need. You really got to be fixated on that. And if you get the details right, your AI system will come out right. So pay attention to details. So we hope that you benefit from this session, where I've come at it from a business perspective, Sujay has come at it from a technology perspective. And together we've given you a sense of what your ML roadmap might look like, and in particular, what your ML ops needs to look like and what the structure needs to be. We're happy to take questions that you might have had. We've been answering many of them along the way. But if you want to reach us, you got our contact information here. Thanks for spending, hopefully, an instructive 30 minutes with us here. Talk to you.
All right, that rounds out today's Techstrong TV broadcast. Hope you enjoyed today's conversations. We had some really good ones, folks. We're going to be back on Thursday with a brand new show. Until then, just a quick reminder, we have so many events coming up throughout the entire year, actually, both in person and virtual. Hope you can join us for a couple of them at least. All of the events that we're sponsoring and hosting and producing ourselves can be held on can be seen at techstrongevents.com. You can go there and you can check out each of the events, their lineup, the agenda, the speakers, and register for them. So hopefully, like I said, you'll be able to join us for one or two or three of them. We've got a very wide range of topics this year, and hopefully one or two will pique your interest. That's it for me for today. Like I said before, I'll be back on Thursday with a new show for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day. And please, whatever you do, stay safe.